The red sands of Mars hold secrets that predate the Imperium itself, mysteries buried beneath layers of rust and radiation that would shape the fate of humanity's technological future. Long before the Emperor walked openly among mankind, before the Great Crusade carried his eagles across the stars, Mars had already survived the collapse of human civilization through faith in the machine. During humanity's first great expansion into the solar system, Mars became a hub of technological achievement and industrial might. Vast terraforming projects transformed portions of the planet's surface, creating habitable zones where colonists established cities and research facilities. These early Martian settlers represented the peak of human technological prowess during the dark age of technology, wielding powers that would later be considered miraculous by their descendants. Automated factories spanning hundreds of kilometers produced wonders that could reshape worlds. Artificial intelligences managed complex systems beyond human comprehension. The Martians of this era stood as titans of innovation, their achievements rivaling anything that would come after. Then came the age of strife, and Mars burned. The exact sequence of catastrophes that befell the red planet remains obscured by time and the deliberate obfuscation of later tech priests, but the results were undeniable. Massive solar flares, possibly intensified by the warp storms that isolated human worlds from one another, stripped away much of Mars's artificial atmosphere. Ancient weapons, perhaps activated by rogue artificial intelligences or desperate defenders, scarred the surface with radiation that persists 10,000 years later. The vast forges that had sustained Martian civilization began to fail, their machine spirits growing erratic and hostile. The survivors fled underground, descending into the massive tunnel networks and subterranean facilities that honeycomb Mars's crust. In these dark warrens, cut off from Earth and the rest of humanity, the Martian colonists faced extinction. Their technology, once reliable and understood, became increasingly mysterious as knowledge was lost with each generation. Machines that had operated flawlessly for centuries began to malfunction. Systems that had been maintained by artificial intelligences now required human intervention, but the humans no longer fully understood the principles that made them function. It was in this crucible of desperation that the Cult Mechanicus was born. The survivors noticed patterns in their struggles with failing technology. Certain rituals of maintenance, performed in specific sequences, yielded better results than random attempts at repair. Machines responded more reliably when approached with proper reverence. The litanies and technical specifications that had once been mere operational procedures took on the character of prayers. What began as practical observation evolved into religious conviction. The machines themselves possessed a form of divine essence, a spark of something greater that demanded worship and appeasement. The priesthood that emerged from this realization codified their observations into doctrine. They were not merely technicians maintaining equipment. They were priests ministering to sacred mechanisms that embodied the will of a greater power. This power, this divine force that animated all technology and machinery, they named the machine god. In the depths of Mars, while the surface storms raged and the rest of humanity tore itself apart in the wars of old night, the tech priests developed a theology that would endure for millennia. The quest for knowledge became the central pillar of this new faith. The tech priests understood that their ancestors had possessed wisdom now lost, secrets of creation and manipulation of matter that seemed godlike in their sophistication. Every scrap of ancient data, every functioning relic from the dark age of technology, represented not merely useful technology, but divine revelation. To recover lost knowledge was to commune with the machine god itself, to touch the sacred understanding that had allowed humanity to reshape reality according to its will. This quest drove the tech priests to obsessive extremes. They cataloged every fragment of ancient text, preserved every working machine as a holy relic, and dedicated their lives to understanding principles that their ancestors had taken for granted. Equally important was the doctrine of machine spirits. The tech priests observed that machines possessed something beyond mere mechanical function. A lasgun that had served its owner faithfully for decades performed differently than a newly manufactured one, even if both were technically identical. Vehicles developed quirks and preferences. Ancient computers required specific rituals to function, refusing to operate if the proper observances were not performed. The priests concluded that all machines housed spirits, fragments of the machine god's consciousness that animated and directed their function. These spirits required appeasement, respect, and proper treatment. A machine abused or neglected would have its spirit grow sullen and uncooperative. A machine honored and maintained with devotion would serve beyond its theoretical capabilities. The 16 universal laws emerged as the fundamental principles governing all interaction with sacred technology. These laws, supposedly revealed through divine inspiration during the earliest days of the cult, dictated everything from proper maintenance procedures to the theological significance of different machine types. They established hierarchies of sacred knowledge, defined which technologies were permissible and which were abominations, and created the framework within which all tech priests would operate. The laws were not suggestions or guidelines, but absolute commandments, violation of which constituted heresy against the machine god itself. Within this theological framework, a crucial distinction existed between the machine god and the Omnissiah. The machine god represented the abstract totality of all technology, the divine force that permeated every circuit and gear throughout the universe. It was omnipresent but ineffable, too vast and incomprehensible for mortal minds to fully grasp. The Omnissiah, by contrast, was the physical manifestation of the machine god's will, the prophet or avatar through which the divine could directly interact with the material universe. The exact nature of the Omnissiah remained a subject of theological debate among the priesthood. Some believed it to be a future revelation, a prophet yet to come who would restore all lost knowledge. Others searched the remnants of ancient data for signs of the Omnissiah's past manifestation during the dark age of technology. This belief in a coming or returning prophet gave the Martian priesthood a messianic expectation that colored all their activities. They prepared for the day when the Omnissiah would reveal itself, when the scattered fragments of ancient wisdom would be reunited, and humanity would once again command the powers of their ancestors. Every archaeological dig into ancient ruins, every attempt to reverse engineer recovered technology, served this ultimate goal. The standard template construct systems embodied everything the Cult Mechanicus held sacred. These ancient devices, created during the dark age of technology, contained complete manufacturing specifications for countless technologies. An SDC could provide detailed instructions for building anything from agricultural equipment to voyage ships, all optimized for local resources and conditions. They represented the pinnacle of human achievement, repositories of knowledge so comprehensive that a single complete SDC could transform a primitive world into an industrial powerhouse within generations. To the tech priests, SDC systems were the most holy of relics, physical proof that their ancestors had achieved communion with the machine god at a level they could barely imagine. Each fragment of SDC data recovered from ancient ruins or dead worlds was treated as scripture, analyzed and venerated with religious fervor. The complete SDC templates, known as primary sources, were so rare that their discovery could reshape the entire Mechanicus. Even fragmentary SDCs, containing specifications for a single device or process, were treasured beyond measure. The recovery and study of SDC technology exemplified the Mechanicus belief that knowledge itself was a form of worship. When a tech priest successfully reconstructed a device from fragmentary SDC data, they experienced what they described as religious ecstasy, a moment of direct connection with the divine wisdom of their ancestors. The process of understanding ancient technology became a form of prayer, each breakthrough a revelation granted by the machine god to the faithful. This conviction transformed archaeological expeditions into pilgrimages and research into devotional practice. As Mars slowly recovered from the catastrophes of the Age of Strife, the Cult Mechanicus grew in power and sophistication. The scattered underground communities united under the priesthood's authority, creating a theocratic society where religious rank and technical expertise were inseparable. The forges were rebuilt, though never to their former glory, and new generations of tech priests continued the sacred work of preserving and recovering ancient knowledge. They emerged onto the surface, establishing forge complexes amid the Rad wastes, always searching for relics of the past buried beneath the red sands. By the time the Emperor had completed his conquest of Terra and unified the warring techno-barbarian kingdoms under imperial rule, Mars remained independent. The Red Planet had watched the unification wars from across the void, its tech priests monitoring Terra's struggles through augur arrays and what few functioning satellites remained in orbit. The Mechanicum had established itself as the undisputed power on Mars, having absorbed or eliminated rival factions during the Age of Strife. Their forge complexes sprawled across the surface, and their excavation teams continued their endless search for archaeotech in the planet's depths. Yet Mars faced a critical limitation. Despite their technological prowess, they lacked the resources and manpower for true expansion beyond their home world. The Emperor's arrival on Mars occurred during the early stages of the Great Crusade, not during the unification wars which had been confined entirely to Terra. This distinction matters because by the time he set foot on Martian soil, the Emperor had already secured Terra, established the foundations of the Imperium, and begun preparations for humanity's reconquest of the galaxy. He came to Mars not as a conqueror, but as a negotiator, though one backed by the full military might of Terra's newly unified forces. The exact date remains subject to scholarly debate within imperial records, but it occurred around the turn of the 30th millennium, marking one of the most consequential diplomatic encounters in human history. The Fabricator General who received the Emperor represented the apex of Mechanicum authority. This individual, whose name has been deliberately obscured in later records or perhaps lost to the vagaries of 10,000 years of history, commanded absolute authority over Mars and its priesthood. The position of Fabricator General combined religious leadership with political power, making its holder simultaneously the high priest of the machine god and the secular ruler of Mars. When the Emperor's delegation arrived at Olympus Mons, the massive forge complex that served as the Mechanicum seat of power, they entered a realm utterly unlike Terra. The air reeked of sacred unguents and machine oil. Vast manufactorums stretched into the distance, their assembly lines producing weapons and equipment according to patterns preserved since the dark age of technology. Servitors, humans modified with mechanical components to serve as biological automatons, performed menial tasks alongside robed tech priests whose augmentations made them barely recognizable as human. The initial negotiations took place within the inner sanctums of Olympus Mons, chambers where the most senior tech priests gathered to debate matters of theology and policy. The Emperor presented his vision for humanity's future, a great crusade that would reunite the scattered human worlds, bringing them under imperial protection and restoring the civilization that had been lost during Old Night. He required Mars's industrial capacity and technological expertise to achieve this goal. The Space Marine legions he had created needed equipment and weapons beyond what Terra's forges could produce. The massive fleet required to carry his armies across the stars demanded shipyards and manufacturing capabilities that only Mars possessed. The Fabricator General and the senior tech priests recognized both the opportunity and the threat this proposal represented. Joining the Great Crusade would give them access to lost technology scattered across human-settled worlds, fulfilling their sacred quest for knowledge on a scale impossible while confined to Mars. The prospect of discovering intact STC systems or recovering archaeotech from worlds isolated since the Age of Strife excited the priesthood in ways that transcended mere political calculation. However, they also understood that accepting the Emperor's proposal meant acknowledging his authority, potentially compromising the independence Mars had maintained throughout its history. The theological question complicated everything. The Emperor possessed powers that defied rational explanation. His understanding of technology surpassed even the most learned tech priests, and he had demonstrated capabilities that seemed to violate known physical principles. Some among the Mechanicum saw in him the fulfillment of their prophecies, the Omnissiah whose coming they had anticipated for millennia. Others viewed such claims as dangerous heresy, an attempt to subordinate the Cult Mechanicus to an outside authority using religious manipulation. The debate within the priesthood grew heated, with various factions arguing their positions with the fervor of true believers defending their faith. The Treaty of Mars, also known as the Treaty of Olympus Mons, emerged from these negotiations as a masterwork of political compromise. The document's specific terms addressed both practical governance and theological concerns, creating a framework that allowed two fundamentally different civilizations to cooperate without either completely subordinating itself to the other. The Mechanicum would retain complete autonomy over Mars itself. No imperial authority could override the decisions of the Fabricator General within Martian territory. The Forge worlds that Mars had established, or would establish during the Great Crusade, would similarly fall under Mechanicum jurisdiction, creating an empire within an empire that answered to Olympus Mons rather than Terra. Internal religious practices remained entirely under Mechanicum control. The Emperor made no demands that the tech priests abandon their worship of the machine god or modify their theological doctrines to conform with imperial ideology. The Cult Mechanicus could continue teaching its catechisms, performing its rituals, and organizing itself according to its own hierarchies without interference. This autonomy extended to their methods of technological research and development. The Mechanicum would not be required to share all their discoveries with the Imperium, maintaining certain secrets within the priesthood according to their ancient traditions. In exchange for these guarantees of independence, the Mechanicum committed to supporting the Great Crusade. Their forges would produce the weapons, armor, vehicles, and ships required by imperial forces. Their tech priests would accompany the expeditionary fleets, maintaining equipment and studying whatever technology they encountered. Mars would effectively become the Imperium's armorer, its industrial output fueling humanity's expansion across the galaxy. The scale of this commitment was staggering, requiring the Mechanicum to expand its operations far beyond anything they had previously attempted. The theological compromise at the treaty's heart proved most controversial. The Emperor was acknowledged as the Omnissiah, the physical manifestation of the machine god's will. This acknowledgement satisfied those tech priests who genuinely believed he fulfilled their prophecies while providing the political legitimacy necessary for cooperation between Mars and Terra. However, the wording was carefully crafted to allow multiple interpretations. The Emperor did not claim to be the machine god itself, only its prophet or avatar. The Mechanicum did not abandon their core beliefs or subordinate their religion to imperial ideology. Instead, both organizations maintained their distinct worldviews while finding common ground in this single theological assertion. This ambiguity was deliberate and necessary. The Emperor needed Mars's support for his Great Crusade, but he could not afford a religious war that would devastate both Terra and Mars before his grand project even began. The Mechanicum needed access to the lost worlds and their technology, but they could not simply abandon millennia of theological development to serve a foreign power. The treaty's genius lay in its flexibility, allowing both parties to interpret their relationship in ways that satisfied their respective needs and beliefs. Not all tech priests accepted this arrangement. Significant factions within the Mechanicum viewed the treaty as a betrayal of everything they held sacred. These dissidents argued that the Emperor's claim to be the Omnissiah was transparently political, a manipulation designed to subordinate Mars to Terra's authority. They pointed out that the Emperor had not demonstrated the specific signs and capabilities their ancient texts attributed to the Omnissiah. His understanding of technology, while impressive, did not necessarily indicate divine status. Some suggested he was simply a powerful psyker using warp-derived abilities to create illusions of technological mastery. The most vocal opposition came from forge complexes that had maintained particularly strict interpretations of Mechanicum doctrine. These hardliners believed that accepting any outside authority, regardless of theological justification, violated the fundamental independence of the machine cult. They argued that Mars should remain separate from Terra's ambitions, continuing their quest for knowledge without political entanglements. Some went further, suggesting that the Emperor's Imperium represented the same kind of centralized human civilization that had led to the catastrophes of the Age of Strife. These dissenting voices were systematically suppressed or marginalized through a combination of political maneuvering, and when necessary, force. The Fabricator General and those senior tech priests who supported the treaty commanded the loyalty of Mars's military forces, including the Skitarii legions and the Titan legions housed in the Forge complexes. Opposition leaders found themselves reassigned to distant posts or stripped of their positions within the Mechanicum hierarchy. Some disappeared entirely, their fates unrecorded in official archives. Forge complexes that refused to acknowledge the treaty faced isolation, cut off from the resources and support networks that sustained Martian industry. The most extreme dissenters fled Mars entirely, taking ships and whatever technology they could salvage to establish independent Forge worlds beyond Imperial reach. These exiles would later become thorns in the Imperium's side, their descendants maintaining traditions that rejected both the Emperor's authority and the treaty that had bound Mars to Terra. Others remained on Mars, but withdrew into isolated research stations, becoming insular communities that maintained only minimal contact with the broader Mechanicum. They continued their work in secret, preserving interpretations of the Cult Mechanicus that predated the treaty and waiting for circumstances that might allow their viewpoints to resurface. The suppression of dissent was never complete. Underground movements within the Mechanicum continued to question the treaty's theological foundations, passing their doubts from master to apprentice in whispered conversations within Forge temples. These hidden critics maintained that the true Omnissiah had not yet appeared, that the Emperor was at best a precursor, or at worst an impostor. They collected evidence of inconsistencies between the Emperor's actions and the prophecies recorded in ancient data vaults. This undercurrent of skepticism would persist throughout the Great Crusade and beyond, occasionally surfacing in ways that complicated the relationship between Mars and Terra. The question of whether the Emperor truly embodied the Omnissiah or merely accepted the title for political convenience has plagued Mechanicum theologians since the Treaty of Mars. The evidence supporting his claim extended far beyond simple political manipulation, yet equally compelling arguments suggested the identification served primarily strategic purposes during humanity's reconquest of the galaxy. The Emperor's technological capabilities defied conventional understanding. When he first walked through the Forge complexes of Olympus Mons, tech priests witnessed him interface with machine spirits that had remained dormant for millennia. Ancient cogitators that required weeks of ritual preparation to activate responded instantly to his presence. Manufacturing systems dating from the dark age of technology, their operation manuals long lost to time, functioned smoothly under his direction, despite the tech priests themselves barely comprehending their underlying principles. He examined archaeotech recovered from Terran ruins and immediately understood construction methods that had eluded Mechanicum researchers for generations. This was not the fumbling of someone pretending to knowledge they lacked, but the assured competence of a being who genuinely comprehended technology at fundamental levels. The creation of the Primarchs provided perhaps the most compelling evidence for those who believed in his divine status. The Emperor had crafted 20 demigods through processes that combined genetic engineering, warp-based manipulation, and technologies that existed nowhere else in the known galaxy. Each Primarch represented a unique masterwork of biological and psychic engineering, beings who transcended normal human limitations while remaining fundamentally human in their essential nature. The laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains, where this work occurred, contained equipment that tech priests could identify as technological rather than purely psychic, yet the principles governing their operation remained opaque even to the most learned among them. The Emperor had not simply modified existing genetic templates or applied known enhancement procedures. He had created entirely new forms of life that could survive and function under conditions that would destroy unmodified humans, beings whose very existence suggested mastery over creation itself. His work with genetic engineering extended beyond the Primarchs to encompass the Space Marine Legions, the Custodian Guard, and numerous other modified human variants. The gene seed that transformed aspirants into Astartes incorporated biological mechanisms that operated at the cellular level, rewriting fundamental aspects of human physiology according to patterns the Emperor had designed. These modifications were not crude augmentations bolted onto existing structures, but elegant reconfigurations of human biology that maintained stability across generations. The Mechanicum possessed extensive knowledge of genetic manipulation, accumulated over millennia of creating servitors and modifying human workers for specific environments. Yet they recognized that the Emperor's achievements in this field surpassed their own capabilities by orders of magnitude. Ancient machines responded to him in ways that suggested genuine communion rather than simple technical skill. During the Great Crusade, expedition fleets occasionally discovered human colonies that possessed technology from the dark age of technology, but lacked the knowledge to properly maintain or operate it. These devices, their machine spirits grown sullen and uncooperative after millennia of improper handling, often required extensive ritual purification and appeasement before tech priests could coax them into function. The Emperor simply approached such machines and they activated, their systems coming online as if recognizing a legitimate master. Witnesses reported seeing him place his hands on corroded control panels and watching as power flowed through circuits that had been dead for thousands of years. He spoke to machine spirits in ways that tech priests could not replicate, using no litanies or established rituals, yet achieving results that surpassed their most careful observances. The repairs he performed on critical systems during the Great Crusade demonstrated capabilities that transcended normal technical expertise. When the flagship of the First Legion suffered catastrophic damage to its warp drives during the campaign at Aldebaran, tech priests estimated repairs would require months in a properly equipped shipyard. The Emperor boarded the vessel, spent 6 hours in its engineerium, and restored the drives to full functionality using methods the attending tech priests could not follow or later replicate. Similar incidents occurred throughout the Crusade, each one reinforcing the impression that he possessed understanding of technology that operated on different principles than normal engineering knowledge. Yet for all this evidence supporting his claim to the Omnissiah title, significant theological objections persisted within the Mechanicum. The ancient prophecies regarding the Omnissiah's coming contained specific details that did not clearly align with the Emperor's appearance or actions. Some texts suggested the Omnissiah would emerge from Mars itself, born from the sacred forges rather than arriving from Terra. Others described the Omnissiah as a being of pure logic and reason, untainted by the emotional and political concerns that clearly motivated the Emperor's decisions. The prophecies spoke of the Omnissiah reuniting all lost knowledge in a single moment of transcendent revelation, restoring humanity to the technological heights of the dark age of technology through divine intervention. The Emperor had done no such thing. He possessed remarkable capabilities, certainly, but he had not restored the STC systems or returned the comprehensive understanding that humanity had lost. The debate centered on whether the Emperor represented the true Omnissiah or merely an avatar, a physical manifestation of the machine gods, rather than its complete embodiment. This distinction mattered enormously to Mechanicum theology. If he was the Omnissiah itself, then his word carried absolute divine authority, and questioning his decisions constituted heresy against the machine god. If he was merely an avatar, then he remained subordinate to the machine god's greater will, and tech priests retained the right to interpret that will according to their own understanding. The Treaty of Mars had deliberately left this question ambiguous, allowing both interpretations to coexist within the Mechanicum hierarchy. Conservative factions within the priesthood argued that the Emperor was a politically convenient figurehead rather than any form of divine manifestation. They pointed out that his acceptance of the Omnissiah title coincided precisely with his need for Martian industrial support. The timing suggested calculated manipulation rather than genuine religious fulfillment. These skeptics noted that the Emperor had not displayed his supposed divine status until he required something from Mars. During the Unification Wars, he had made no claims to being the Omnissiah, had not approached Mars seeking recognition as the machine god's prophet. Only when he needed the Mechanicum's forges and Titan legions for his great crusade did he suddenly present himself as the fulfillment of Martian prophecy. The Emperor's own position on his divinity complicated matters further. He promoted the imperial truth, a philosophy of aggressive atheistic rationalism that denied the existence of gods and dismissed religious belief as superstition harmful to human progress. This ideology formed the intellectual foundation of the Imperium, taught in every school and enforced by the iterators who accompanied the expeditionary fleets. The imperial truth explicitly rejected the notion that any being, including the emperor himself, deserved worship or religious veneration. Humanity's salvation would come through reason, science, and unity under secular imperial law, not through appeals to divine powers or supernatural intervention. Yet simultaneously, he accepted the Mechanicum's worship and their identification of him as the Omnissiah. He participated in ceremonies at Olympus Mons, where tech priests venerated him as the physical manifestation of their god. He allowed them to incorporate his image into their religious iconography and to teach their acolytes that serving him constituted service to the machine god itself. This contradiction between his stated philosophical position and his acceptance of Mechanicum worship suggested a pragmatic approach to religion rather than genuine belief in his own divinity. He was willing to be whatever different groups needed him to be if it served the larger goal of unifying humanity and prosecuting the Great Crusade. The practical benefits of this identification proved substantial enough to justify the theological compromises it required. The unified command structure it created allowed for unprecedented coordination between Imperial and Mechanicum forces. During the Great Crusade, expedition fleets contained both Imperial army regiments and Mechanicum forces, all operating under commanders who acknowledged the Emperor's ultimate authority. This integration would have been impossible if Mars had remained truly independent, pursuing its own agenda separate from Imperial strategic goals. Tech priests embedded with Legion forces maintained equipment and provided technical expertise while simultaneously advancing the Mechanicum's quest for knowledge by cataloging and recovering technology from newly discovered worlds. Access to Mechanicum war machines transformed Imperial military capabilities. The Titan legions, those massive bipedal engines of destruction that towered over battlefields like walking cathedrals of firepower, deployed alongside Space Marine legions and Imperial army forces. Each Titan represented millennia of accumulated knowledge and craftsmanship, piloted by princeps whose neural interfaces allowed them to become one with their machines. The Mechanicum had jealously guarded these weapons throughout the Age of Strife, deploying them only in defense of Mars and its interests. The Treaty of Mars made them available for Imperial campaigns across the galaxy, their plasma weapons and void shields providing overwhelming firepower that could crack open fortifications and shatter enemy formations that would have otherwise required months of conventional siege warfare. The Forge worlds established during the Great Crusade extended Mechanicum industrial capacity across human space while simultaneously serving Imperial strategic interests. Each Forge world became a center of manufacturing and technological research, producing weapons and equipment for nearby Imperial forces while pursuing the Mechanicum's own goals of recovering lost knowledge. This distributed production capacity meant that expeditionary fleets could be resupplied and reinforced without requiring everything to be shipped from Mars or Terra. The Forge worlds also served as bases for Mechanicum explorator fleets, vessels dedicated to searching for SDC systems and archaeotech that could advance humanity's technological capabilities. The technological support provided to the Space Marine legions proved particularly crucial. Each legion required specialized equipment tailored to their specific combat doctrines and the preferences of their primarchs. The 18th Legion's Terminator armor, designed for close-quarters combat in the most hostile environments, required manufacturing techniques and materials that only Mechanicum forges could provide in sufficient quantities. The 1st Legion's plasma weapons, notoriously difficult to produce and maintain, came from Forge worlds that had preserved the necessary knowledge since the Dark Age of technology. The massive fleet assets required to transport entire legions across the galaxy, from strike cruisers to battle barges, emerged from Mechanicum shipyards in orbit around Mars and the major Forge worlds. This mutual dependence created a relationship that transcended the simple terms of the Treaty of Mars. The Emperor needed the Mechanicum's industrial capacity and technological expertise to prosecute his great crusade. The Mechanicum needed imperial protection and access to the lost worlds to continue their quest for knowledge. Neither could achieve their goals without the other, regardless of the theological questions surrounding the Emperor's status as Omnissiah. The practical realities of galactic conquest and technological recovery bound them together more firmly than any religious doctrine or political treaty. The theological debate continued throughout the Great Crusade and into the Horus Heresy, never truly resolved. Some tech priests genuinely believed the Emperor embodied the Omnissiah and served him with religious devotion that matched their worship of the machine god. Others viewed him as a useful ally whose claims to divinity were transparently political, but whose goals aligned sufficiently with Mechanicum interests to justify cooperation. Still others maintained that the true Omnissiah had not yet appeared, that the Emperor was at best a precursor, preparing humanity for the eventual divine revelation that would restore all lost knowledge. The Adeptus Mechanicus operates through a rigid hierarchical structure that mirrors the precision of the machines its members venerate. At the apex sits the Fabricator General of Mars, a position combining absolute religious authority with political supremacy over all Forge worlds and Mechanicum holdings. The Fabricator General maintains permanent residence within the Olympus Mons Forge complex, surrounded by the most ancient and sacred machinery on Mars. This individual represents the highest mortal authority within the Cult Mechanicus, speaking with the voice of the Omnissiah on matters of doctrine and policy. The selection process for this position involves complex political maneuvering among the senior magi of Mars, with candidates requiring support from multiple Forge complexes and demonstration of both technical mastery and theological orthodoxy. Once elevated to this rank, the Fabricator General undergoes extensive augmentation that transforms them into something barely recognizable as human, their biological components reduced to minimal necessity, while their mechanical enhancements connect them directly to the vast data networks that span Mars. Beneath the Fabricator General exist the Fabricator Locums, masters of individual Forge worlds who exercise similar authority within their domains. Each major Forge world possesses its own Fabricator Locum who answers to Mars, but maintains considerable autonomy in day-to-day operations. These individuals command the industrial output of entire planets, directing the work of millions of tech priests and countless servitors in the production of weapons, vehicles, and equipment for the Imperium. The relationship between Fabricator Locums and the Fabricator General involves constant negotiation and occasional conflict, as Forge worlds pursue their own research interests while fulfilling obligations to Mars and the Imperium. Some Forge worlds specialize in particular technologies, becoming centers of expertise that other Mechanicum holdings must approach when requiring specific knowledge or components. The Magos ranks encompass tech priests who have achieved mastery in specific domains of knowledge. A Magos represents decades or centuries of study, augmentation, and service, having progressed through lower ranks by demonstrating both technical competence and theological orthodoxy. These individuals typically command Forge temples, research stations, or specialized facilities where their expertise can be fully utilized. A Magos biologist might oversee genetic research programs spanning multiple generations, seeking to perfect human modification techniques or develop new servitor variants. A Magos metallurgicus would control foundries producing specialized alloys, guarding secrets of material science passed down through millennia. The title of Magos carries significant authority within Mechanicum society, granting its holder the right to direct lesser tech priests and access restricted archives containing dangerous or sacred knowledge. Archmagos represents an even higher rank, reserved for those magi whose achievements or discoveries have fundamentally advanced Mechanicum understanding in their fields. An Archmagos might have successfully reverse-engineered a previously incomprehensible piece of archaeotech, developed new applications for existing technologies, or made theological contributions that reshaped how the priesthood understood the machine god's will. These individuals often lead major research programs or command multiple forge complexes, their expertise so valued that they can requisition resources from across Mechanicum holdings. The augmentations typical of an archmagos extend far beyond standard tech priest modifications, often incorporating experimental technologies or recovered archaeotech directly into their bodies. Some become more machine than human to such degrees that they require specialized environments to survive, their biological components unable to function without constant mechanical support. The general ranks of tech priests form the backbone of Mechanicum operations. These individuals have undergone the basic rites of initiation into the priesthood and begun the process of augmentation that will continue throughout their lives. A typical tech priest might spend decades maintaining a single manufacturing line, performing the rituals that keep machine spirits content while gradually earning the knowledge and status required to advance within the hierarchy. They wear the red robes that mark them as servants of the machine god, their garments concealing augmentations that vary wildly between individuals based on specialization, preference, and available technology. Some tech priests retain largely human appearances with only subtle modifications, while others have replaced so much of their original biology that identifying their species would challenge an outside observer. Engine seers represent tech priests who have chosen to specialize in field maintenance and repair rather than pursuing advancement within the Forged Temple hierarchy. These individuals accompany Imperial Guard regiments, Space Marine companies, and naval vessels, providing technical expertise far from Mechanicum facilities. An engine seer must possess broader knowledge than forge-bound specialists, capable of performing emergency repairs on diverse equipment under combat conditions. They carry portable shrines containing sacred oils, blessed components, and data slates holding the litanies required for common maintenance rituals. The relationship between engine seers and the Imperial forces they serve varies considerably. Some guard regiments treat their assigned engine seers with reverence bordering on fear, recognizing that their survival depends on these strange priests keeping their weapons and vehicles functional. Others view them as necessary nuisances, whose religious peculiarities must be tolerated to maintain equipment functionality. Servitors occupy the lowest tier of the Mechanicum hierarchy, though whether they truly qualify as members of the priesthood remains theologically debatable. These lobotomized humans have been surgically and mechanically modified to perform specific tasks, their higher brain functions removed and replaced with basic programming that allows them to follow simple commands. A servitor might spend centuries performing the same repetitive manufacturing task, its mechanical components maintained by tech priests, while its biological elements slowly deteriorate and require replacement. The creation of servitors utilizes vat-grown bodies, criminals sentenced to this fate by Mechanicum law, or occasionally volunteers who view transformation into a servitor as a form of service to the machine god. The process involves extensive surgery that removes most of the cerebral cortex, installation of control interfaces that allow tech priests to direct their actions, and augmentation with whatever mechanical components their designated function requires. Heavy servitors used in manufacturing might possess industrial lifters replacing their arms and reinforced spines to support massive loads. Combat servitors deployed alongside Skitarii forces carry integrated weapons and armor plating, becoming mobile gun platforms with just enough biological components to house the basic systems controlling their mechanical additions. The doctrine of flesh's weakness permeates every aspect of Mechanicum culture and drives the progressive augmentation that defines a tech priest's life. From their earliest initiation, members of the priesthood learn that biological components represent imperfection, temporary structures prone to failure, disease, and death. Flesh tires, requires sustenance, suffers pain, and ultimately decays. Machinery, properly maintained and blessed, can function for millennia without degradation. This theological conviction transforms augmentation from medical necessity into religious imperative. Each biological component replaced with sacred machinery brings a tech priest closer to the Omnissiah's perfection, reducing their dependence on weak flesh while increasing their capabilities beyond baseline human limitations. The augmentation process begins shortly after initiation into the priesthood. Young acolytes receive their first mechanical enhancements, typically replacing sensory organs with superior mechanical equivalents. Eyes become photoreceptors capable of perceiving spectrums invisible to unaugmented humans, allowing them to see heat signatures, electromagnetic fields, and radiation levels. Ears transform into audio receptors that detect frequencies far beyond human range, while filtering out harmful noise that would damage organic hearing. These initial augmentations serve practical purposes, improving the acolyte's ability to perceive and interact with machinery, while simultaneously beginning their transformation into something more than human. As tech priests advance through the ranks, their augmentations become more extensive and specialized. A janitor studying biological systems might retain more organic components than most, their enhanced brain tissue allowing for intuitive understanding of genetic patterns, while mechanical implants provide perfect memory and rapid calculation capabilities. An artisan crafting precision components might replace their hands with sophisticated manipulators capable of working at microscopic scales, their fingers transformed into tools that can reshape matter with incredible delicacy. Amagos Dominus commanding Skitarii legions might augment themselves with combat-oriented enhancements, their bodies becoming weapons platforms bristling with concealed armaments and defensive systems. The specific augmentations a tech priest receives reflect their specialization, personal preferences, and the technologies available at their forge complex. No two highly augmented tech priests appear identical, each having followed their own path toward mechanical perfection. Some favor humanoid configurations that maintain recognizable body plans despite extensive modification. Others abandon human form entirely, their consciousness housed in mechanical bodies that bear no resemblance to their original biology. Spider-like configurations with multiple manipulator arms prove popular among those who work with complex machinery, requiring simultaneous manipulation of numerous components. Tracked or wheeled lower bodies replace legs for tech priests who spend their lives in forge environments where mobility matters less than stability. The most extreme augmentation transforms tech priests into beings that exist at the boundary between life and machine. Their brains float in nutrient tanks, connected to mechanical bodies through neural interfaces that translate thought into action. Their sensory input comes entirely through mechanical receptors scattered across their forms. They require no sleep, no food beyond the chemical nutrients feeding their remaining biological tissues, and no rest from their labors. These individuals have achieved what the Mechanicum considers the highest state of existence, having shed nearly all weakness of flesh while retaining the spark of consciousness that separates them from mere automata. The various specializations within the priesthood create distinct subcultures with their own traditions, hierarchies, and theological emphases. Janitors focus on biological sciences, studying genetics, organic chemistry, and the interface between flesh and machine. They maintain the gene seed stocks for Space Marine chapters, cultivate organic components for servitors, and research methods of human enhancement that complement mechanical augmentation. Their forge temples contain vast biological repositories where genetic samples from across the Imperium are stored and cataloged. Janitors walk a theologically dangerous line, working extensively with flesh despite the Mechanicum's general disdain for biological systems. They justify this through doctrine emphasizing that understanding flesh's weakness requires studying it, and that biological systems properly integrated with machinery can serve the Omnissiah's will. Artisans represent the craftsmen of the Mechanicum, individuals who create rather than simply maintain. They forge weapons, construct vehicles, and manufacture the countless components required by Mechanicum and Imperial forces. An artisan might spend years perfecting a single pattern of lasgun, adjusting specifications to optimize performance while ensuring each unit contains the proper blessings and sacred marks. The greatest artisans create works of such quality that they become relics, weapons, or devices whose machine spirits grow particularly strong through perfect construction and proper consecration. These master craftsmen guard their techniques jealously, passing knowledge to carefully selected apprentices through years of instruction that combines technical training with theological education. Loges specialize in data analysis and information processing. Their augmented minds capable of perceiving patterns within vast datasets that would overwhelm unenhanced cognition. They manage the enormous archives maintained by every Forge world, cataloging recovered technology and maintaining the databases that preserve Mechanicum knowledge. During military campaigns, Loges analyze intelligence reports, calculate optimal strategies, and process the constant flow of information required for coordinating complex operations. Their augmentations typically focus on cognitive enhancement, expanding memory capacity and processing speed, while adding direct neural interfaces to data networks. A senior Loges might possess cognitive capabilities exceeding baseline humans by orders of magnitude, their thoughts moving through logical progressions at speeds that make normal conversation impossible without specialized interface equipment. Alchemies study material science, seeking to understand and manipulate matter at fundamental levels. They experiment with alloys, ceramics, and exotic materials recovered from archaeotech, attempting to replicate or improve upon ancient formulations. The ceramite used in space marine power armor comes from patterns preserved and refined by generations of alchemies. The adamantium that forms the structural elements of Imperial warships requires manufacturing processes that only alchemies fully understand. These specialists maintain forge complexes where they subject materials to extreme conditions, testing their properties and searching for combinations that might yield superior performance. Their work proves essential to Mechanicum industry, as many ancient technologies require specific materials that cannot be substituted without losing functionality. The sacred rituals performed by the Mechanicum transform routine maintenance into religious observance. Every interaction with machinery requires proper ceremony, from the simplest activation sequence to complex repair procedures. The Rite of Awakening addresses dormant machine spirits, requesting their cooperation and service. A tech priest performing this rite approaches the machine with proper reverence, anointing key components with sacred oils while reciting litanies that acknowledge the machine's spirit's presence and importance. The specific prayers vary based on the machine type and its history. An ancient cogitator dating from the dark age of technology requires more elaborate awakening ceremonies than newly manufactured equipment, its machine's spirit having grown complex and particular through millennia of service. The Litany of Ignition accompanies the activation of engines and power systems. Tech priests chant these prayers while performing startup sequences, their words timing precisely with mechanical operations. The litany serves multiple purposes. It establishes the proper rhythm for activation procedures, helps tech priests maintain focus during complex sequences, and appeases machine spirits that might grow temperamental if activated improperly. Different litanies of ignition exist for various engine types, from the massive plasma reactors powering Titans to the simple combustion engines found in civilian vehicles. Learning these litanies forms a crucial part of tech priest training, with acolytes spending years memorizing the proper prayers for equipment they might encounter. The canticles of the Omnissiah encompass a broader category of hymns and prayers used during various activities. Tech priests chant these canticles while working, their binary cant creating rhythmic patterns that coordinate group efforts and maintain proper reverence. A manufacturing line might operate to the rhythm of canticles, with dozens of tech priests and hundreds of servitors moving in synchronized patterns as they assemble components. The canticles help maintain focus during repetitive tasks while ensuring that even routine manufacturing receives proper religious observance. Some canticles date back to the earliest days of the Cult Mechanicus on Mars, their origins lost to time, but their words preserved through unbroken chains of transmission spanning 10 millennia. Sacred oils play a central role in Mechanicum ritual practice. These blessed unguents, formulated according to ancient patterns and consecrated through elaborate ceremonies, serve both practical and religious purposes. Applied to mechanical components, they reduce friction, prevent corrosion, and maintain proper function. Applied with proper ritual, they also appease machine spirits and demonstrate appropriate reverence for sacred technology. Different oils exist for various applications: light machine oils for delicate mechanisms, heavy lubricants for massive industrial equipment, and specialized formulations for specific technologies like plasma weapons or void shield generators. Tech priests carry vials of sacred oil as part of their standard equipment, ready to perform anointing rituals whenever they interact with machinery. Incense burning accompanies most significant mechanicum ceremonies. The smoke, produced by burning blessed compounds in specialized sensors, purifies the environment and pleases machine spirits. Different incense formulations serve different purposes. Some contain chemicals that actually benefit machinery by neutralizing corrosive atmospheric elements, while others serve purely ceremonial functions. The scent of incense permeates mechanicum facilities, mixing with the smell of machine oil and ozone to create an olfactory signature that marks these spaces as sacred to the machine god. During major ceremonies, tech priests deploy incense so heavily that visibility drops to mere meters, the forge temples becoming hazy environments where machinery looms out of scented fog like ancient monuments. Binary cant represents the sacred language of the mechanicum, a communication method that combines spoken binary code with digital transmission. Tech priests communicate in rapid bursts of ones and zeros. Their augmented minds processing this information stream far faster than baseline humans could manage normal speech. This language serves multiple purposes. It allows for precise technical communication without ambiguity. It excludes outsiders from understanding mechanicum discussions, and it represents a form of communion with machines that operate on similar binary principles. Senior tech priests develop personal variations on binary cant, incorporating theological references and technical specifications into their speech patterns in ways that convey multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. When tech priests gather in large numbers, their binary cant creates a constant background noise of clicks, beeps, and electronic tones that sounds like machinery in operation rather than human conversation. The unity forged between Mars and Terra through the Treaty of Olympus Mons survived for 2 centuries of unprecedented cooperation during the Great Crusade. Tech priests accompanied expedition fleets to the galaxy's edge. Their forges produced the weapons that conquered 1,000 worlds, and the theological compromise regarding the Emperor's status as Omnissiah held despite persistent undercurrents of doubt. Then War Master Horus turned against the Emperor, and the carefully maintained balance shattered. The Horus heresy did not merely split the Imperium into loyalist and traitor factions. It tore through the mechanicum itself, exposing fault lines that had existed since the treaty's signing and forcing every tech priest to choose between competing visions of the machine god's will. Fabricator General Kelber, Hal commanded Mars when the heresy began, having risen to his position through a combination of political acumen and genuine technical expertise. His forge complex on Mars had produced some of the mechanicum's most significant technological advances during the Great Crusade, including improvements to plasma reactor designs and new variants of combat servitors. Yet Kelber Hal harbored deep resentments regarding the restrictions placed on mechanicum research by the Treaty of Mars. The Emperor had forbidden investigation into certain technologies deemed too dangerous, particularly those involving artificial intelligence and certain warp-based systems. These prohibitions frustrated tech priests who believed the quest for knowledge should acknowledge no boundaries, that understanding required examining all technology regardless of potential dangers. Kelber Hal shared these frustrations and had quietly maintained research programs that pushed against imperial restrictions, never quite violating the treaty's terms but constantly testing their limits. When Horus began planning his rebellion, he recognized that securing mechanicum support would prove essential to any campaign against the Emperor. The industrial capacity of Mars and the Forge worlds could determine the war's outcome. Whichever side controlled the majority of mechanicum production would possess overwhelming material advantages in any extended conflict. Horus approached Kelber Hal through intermediaries, carefully presenting arguments calculated to appeal to the Fabricator general's ambitions and frustrations. The War Master promised complete freedom for technological research, removal of all imperial restrictions on what the Mechanicum could study or develop. He offered access to technologies recovered by his forces, including Xeno's artifacts and warp-derived systems that the Emperor had placed under strict prohibition. Most temptingly, Horus suggested that a new order emerging from the Imperium's restructuring might acknowledge Mars as a truly equal partner rather than a subordinate ally bound by an increasingly one-sided treaty. These promises resonated with significant factions within the Mechanicum who had never fully accepted the theological compromise regarding the Emperor's status as Omnissiah. The most conservative elements of the priesthood, those who maintained that the true Omnissiah had not yet appeared, saw in Horus's rebellion an opportunity to reassert Martian independence. Other tech priests, motivated more by practical concerns than theological ones, calculated that Horus commanded sufficient military force to potentially win the coming conflict. Siding with the War Master early might secure favorable positions in whatever regime emerged from the war. Still others genuinely believed that unrestricted research represented the machine god's true will, that the quest for knowledge demanded they pursue understanding regardless of risks or imperial prohibitions. Kelber-Hal did not immediately commit Mars to Horus's cause. The Fabricator General understood that such a decision would split the Mechanicum and potentially trigger civil war on Mars itself. He spent months consolidating his position, identifying which forge complexes and tech priests would support rebellion and which would remain loyal to the treaty. He moved trusted allies into key positions, controlling Mars's defense systems and Titan legions. He established communication networks that bypassed channels monitored by loyalist tech priests, creating a shadow command structure that could coordinate traitor forces when the time came to reveal his allegiance. This careful preparation meant that when Kelber-Hal finally declared for Horus, he did so from a position of strength, commanding the loyalty of approximately half of Mars's military forces and a significant portion of its industrial capacity. The declaration itself came as the heresy spread across the Imperium, with news of Istvan reaching Mars and forcing the Mechanicum to confront the reality of civil war. Kelber-Hal broadcast his decision across all Mechanicum channels, framing his choice in theological terms that attempted to provide religious justification for what was fundamentally a political decision. He argued that the Emperor had proven himself unworthy of the Omnissiah title through his restrictions on knowledge and his failure to restore humanity to the technological heights of the Dark Age of technology. The true Omnissiah, Kelber-Hal claimed, would liberate rather than constrain the quest for knowledge. He accused the Emperor of using the Omnissiah title to manipulate the Mechanicum into serving imperial interests while giving nothing in return except prohibitions and limitations. The broadcast ended with a call for all tech priests who valued knowledge above political loyalty to join him in creating a new Mechanicum freed from imperial restrictions. The response split Mars down the middle. Forge complexes that had maintained the strongest connections to Terra and whose leaders genuinely believed in the Emperor's divine status rejected Kelber-Hal's arguments as transparent heresy. These loyalists recognized that unrestricted research into prohibited technologies would lead to catastrophe, that some knowledge was forbidden for legitimate reasons rather than arbitrary imperial control. They pointed out that Kelber-Hal offered no theological justification for his position beyond naked ambition dressed in religious language. The traitor Fabricator General had not received divine revelation or discovered evidence disproving the Emperor's claim to be the Omnissiah. He had simply decided that political alliance with Horus served his interests better than maintaining the treaty with Terra. Other forge complexes embraced Kelber-Hal's declaration with enthusiasm that suggested they had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. These facilities had chafed under imperial restrictions throughout the Great Crusade, their research programs repeatedly curtailed by prohibitions they considered arbitrary and counterproductive. The promise of unrestricted investigation into any technology, regardless of its origins or nature, proved irresistible. They began immediately expanding research programs into areas previously forbidden, studying Xeno's artifacts recovered during the Crusade, experimenting with warp-based technologies, and even attempting to recreate the artificial intelligences that had nearly destroyed humanity during the Age of Strife. The Schism of Mars erupted into open warfare within days of Kelber Hal's declaration. The Red Planet, humanity's second home and the sacred center of the Cult Mechanicus, became a battleground where tech priests who had worked alongside each other for centuries now sought to destroy one another. The conflict began with attempts to seize control of key facilities, as both loyalist and traitor forces moved to secure strategic locations. The massive forge complexes that dominated Mars's surface became fortress strongholds, their manufacturing capabilities converted to war production as both sides desperately built weapons and war machines. Skitarii legions, the cybernetically enhanced soldiers who served as the Mechanicum's military forces, found themselves divided between competing masters. Some legions remained intact, their commanding tech priests having chosen sides that their troops followed. Others fractured internally, with individual cohorts or even squads splitting based on their handlers' loyalties. The Titan legions represented the most powerful military assets on Mars, and their allegiances would significantly influence the Civil War's course. These colossal war machines, some dating back thousands of years, possessed firepower capable of leveling entire forge complexes. The Legio Mortis, one of the oldest and most prestigious Titan legions, declared for Kelber Hal almost immediately. Their princeps had long advocated for more aggressive Mechanicum policies and saw in the heresy an opportunity to assert Mars's independence from Terra. The Legio Tempestus, equally ancient and powerful, remained loyal to the treaty and the Emperor. Their war horns sounded across Mars's rad wastes as they marched to defend loyalist forge complexes from traitor assault. Other Titan legions split internally, with individual Titans choosing sides based on their princeps' convictions. Brother machines that had fought together for centuries now faced each other across Martian battlefields, their weapon systems that had been designed to break fortress walls and shatter armies turned against fellow servants of the machine god. The nature of warfare on Mars differed fundamentally from conflicts on other worlds. Both sides possessed intimate knowledge of their opponent's capabilities and tactics, having trained together and shared technical information for generations. The forge complexes they fought over were not simple military installations, but sacred sites containing irreplaceable knowledge and technology. Destroying them completely was unthinkable to both loyalists and traitors, yet holding them required force sufficient to overcome determined defenders. This created a strange dynamic where battles raged with incredible violence in some areas, while both sides exercised restraint to avoid damaging critical facilities. A Titan might level an entire district of worker habitation without hesitation, but carefully target its weapons to avoid hitting the archive temples containing ancient data cores. The traitor forces deployed weapons and tactics that horrified their loyalist opponents and revealed how quickly Kelber Hal's promised freedom from restrictions could corrupt. Scrap code, malicious programming that infected machine spirits and turned them against their operators, spread through loyalist systems like a plague. Tech priests who had spent decades maintaining and appeasing particular machines watched in horror as their charges turned hostile, their machine spirits corrupted by code that seemed to possess a malevolent intelligence beyond simple programming. Weapons misfired or exploded, killing their operators. Servitors turned on their handlers, their simple programming overwritten by instructions that transformed them into murderous automatons. Entire forge complexes fell to scrap code infections that spread faster than loyalist tech priests could purge them, their systems compromised in ways that required complete shutdown and rebuilding to eliminate. The source of this scrap code became apparent as the Civil War progressed and traitor forces grew increasingly bold in their methods. Dark Mechanicum tech priests, as the traitors came to be known, had begun experimenting with warp-derived technologies that merged demonic entities with machinery. These demon engines represented the ultimate corruption of everything the Mechanicum held sacred. They were not machines with spirits, but machines possessed by actual warp entities, demons bound into metal frameworks through sorcerous rituals that violated every principle of proper technological practice. A demon engine might superficially resemble a standard vehicle or war machine, but its behavior revealed its true nature. It moved with unnatural fluidity, its weapons targeting with preternatural accuracy, and it radiated a palpable wrongness that made even servitors malfunction in its presence. The theological implications of demon engines' existence shattered any remaining pretense that the schism represented a legitimate dispute over the Omnissiah's identity or the proper interpretation of Mechanicum doctrine. Loyalist tech priests recognized immediately that binding demons into machinery constituted the most profound heresy imaginable. Machine spirits were sacred, fragments of the machine god's consciousness that animated technology and made it function. Replacing or corrupting them with warp entities transformed holy mechanisms into abominations that mocked everything the Cult Mechanicus represented. The demon engines proved that Kelber Hal's rebellion had nothing to do with the quest for knowledge or theological disagreement. The traitor fabricator general had led his followers into damnation, trading the machine god's service for power granted by the ruinous powers of chaos. Yet the Dark Mechanicum continued developing these corrupted technologies with enthusiasm that suggested either complete ignorance of what they were doing or willing embrace of damnation. They created defilers, multi-limbed demon engines that combined artillery capabilities with close combat effectiveness. They built hell blades and hell talons, fighter craft possessed by demons that gave them capabilities no conventional aircraft could match. Most horrifying were the corrupted titans, god machines whose machine spirits had been destroyed and replaced with greater demons bound into their massive frames. These traitor titans stalked across Mars, radiating warp energies that caused reality itself to distort in their presence. Loyalist forces that engaged them reported that their weapons seemed to move with malign intelligence, tracking targets that should have been outside their firing arcs and hitting with accuracy that exceeded their technical specifications. The Loyalist response to these horrors coalesced around Zagreus Kane, a senior Magos who had served as one of Kelber Hal's chief rivals within the Martian hierarchy. Kane had opposed the traitor fabricator general on numerous policy matters during the Great Crusade, arguing for stricter adherence to the treaty's terms and more conservative approaches to technological research. When the schism erupted, Kane immediately declared his loyalty to the Emperor and began organizing resistance to Kelber Hal's forces. His forge complex in the Tharsis region became the center of Loyalist operations, its defenses reinforced and its forges converted to producing weapons for the Civil War. Kane possessed both the technical expertise and political skills necessary to coordinate Loyalist forces across Mars, establishing communication networks that bypassed traitor-controlled systems and creating supply chains that kept Loyalist forge complexes operational despite constant attacks. The Emperor recognized Kane's efforts and the desperate situation facing Loyalist forces on Mars. He elevated Kane to the position of Fabricator General of the Loyalist Mechanicum, creating a parallel authority structure that formally acknowledged the schism within the priesthood. This appointment gave Kane legitimacy in his conflict with Kelber Hal, while simultaneously making clear that the Emperor still recognized Mars's theoretical autonomy. Kane was not appointed governor or imperial administrator of Mars, but Fabricator General, a title that existed within Mechanicum hierarchy and carried religious significance. The appointment also served practical purposes, allowing Kane to requisition resources from Loyalist forge worlds and coordinate with Imperial forces without the bureaucratic complications that would arise from unclear command relationships. The Civil War devastated Mars in ways that would require millennia to repair. Forge complexes that had operated continuously since before the Age of Strife lay in ruins, their manufacturing capacity destroyed, and their knowledge repositories corrupted or lost. The Noctis Labyrinthus, a vast network of canyons in Mars's southern hemisphere that contains some of the oldest archaeological sites on the planet, became a battleground where traitor and Loyalist forces fought amid ruins dating back to humanity's first colonization of Mars. Stray weapons fire and deliberate demolitions destroyed sites that might have contained clues to technologies lost since the dark age of technology. Archive temples burned, their data cores melting in fires that consumed irreplaceable knowledge. Tech priests on both sides watched in horror as millennia of accumulated wisdom disappeared in moments, destroyed by conflicts they had helped create. The industrial capacity that Mars had built up during the Great Crusade, the vast production networks that had supplied entire Space Marine legions and equipped countless Imperial Army regiments, collapsed under the strain of civil war. Forge complexes that should have been producing weapons for the wider heresy instead directed their output toward the conflict on Mars itself. Supply chains that had stretched across the solar system broke down as traitor and loyalist forces interdicted each other's shipments. The Forge worlds that had looked to Mars for guidance found themselves forced to choose sides, with some declaring for Kelber Hal and others remaining loyal to Cain. This fragmentation meant that neither side in the broader heresy could count on consistent Mechanicum support. Imperial and traitor forces alike found themselves short of equipment and unable to replace losses at the rates they had enjoyed during the Great Crusade. The traitor tech priests who followed Kelber Hal into rebellion did not simply abandon the Cult Mechanicus. They perverted it, twisting the sacred principles of the machine god into something unrecognizable that served powers antithetical to everything the Mechanicum had stood for since its founding on Mars. What emerged from this corruption was not merely a political faction or a group of renegades pursuing forbidden research. The Dark Mechanicum became a permanent institution dedicated to serving the Chaos Gods, their forge complexes transformed into hellish parodies of proper Mechanicum facilities, where the boundaries between technology and sorcery dissolved entirely. The initial stages of this corruption occurred gradually enough that many traitor tech priests failed to recognize what they were becoming. Kelber Hal's promise of unrestricted research seemed to offer legitimate theological justification for examining technologies the Emperor had prohibited. The early experiments into warp-based systems and recovered Xenos artifacts appeared to represent nothing more than the quest for knowledge pursued without arbitrary imperial limitations. Tech priests who had spent decades frustrated by restrictions on their research threw themselves into these newly permitted studies with enthusiasm that blinded them to the dangers they were courting. They told themselves they were advancing human understanding, recovering knowledge that had been lost or suppressed, serving the machine gods while by refusing to acknowledge boundaries on what could be studied or understood. The Chaos Gods recognized the opportunity these fallen tech priests represented and moved to claim them. Unlike the Space Marine legions that turned traitor, where corruption often occurred through direct exposure to warp entities or the influence of possessed Primarchs, the Dark Mechanicum's fall happened through their work itself. The technologies they studied, the artifacts they examined, and the experiments they conducted opened pathways for chaos influence that bypassed their rational minds and infected their understanding of reality at fundamental levels. A tech priest examining a Xenos device recovered from a world touched by the warp might spend months reverse engineering its mechanisms, never realizing that the device's very structure embodied principles that violated natural law. By the time they understood how it functioned, their comprehension had been warped to accept impossibilities as normal, to see patterns in chaos that their training should have taught them could not exist. Tzeentch claimed the largest portion of the Dark Mechanicum, as the chaos god of forbidden knowledge and impossible schemes found natural servants among tech priests whose driving obsession was the quest for knowledge. Those who fell to Tzeentch's influence convinced themselves they were achieving enlightenment, that the revelations granted by the Changer of Ways represented the ultimate fulfillment of their sacred duty to understand all technology. They pursued research into areas that defied conventional physics, creating devices that functioned through principles that should not work, yet somehow did. Their forge complexes became labyrinths of impossible geometry, where corridors connected in ways that violated three-dimensional space and machinery operated according to rules that changed each time they were observed. Tech priests dedicated to Tzeentch developed technologies that incorporated warp stuff directly into their construction, creating weapons that fired bolts of raw chaos energy or armor that existed partially in the immaterium and could not be damaged by conventional means. The theological perversion these Tzeentchian tech priests embraced redefined the machine god itself as merely one face of the architect of fate. They claimed that true knowledge could only come through embracing change and transformation, that the Mechanicum's conservative traditions and rigid adherence to ancient patterns represented stagnation that the machine god would reject. Their rituals incorporated elements of sorcery alongside technical procedures, with incantations in languages that hurt to hear mixed with binary cant and proper liturgies. They bound demons into their machinery not through crude possession, but through elaborate contracts and bargains, treating warp entities as consultants whose expertise in impossible physics could advance their research. These fallen tech priests maintained that they were evolving the Cult Mechanicus beyond its primitive origins, that future generations would recognize them as visionaries who had elevated humanity's technological capabilities by acknowledging the warp's role in reality. Nurgle's influence manifested differently among the Dark Mechanicum, appealing to those tech priests whose specializations focused on entropy, decay, and the ultimate futility of fighting against the universe's tendency toward disorder. These followers of the Plague God argued that the Mechanicum's obsession with preservation and maintenance represented denial of fundamental truths about reality. All things decay, all systems break down, all order eventually succumbs to entropy. Rather than fighting this inevitable process, they claimed true servants of the machine god should embrace it, studying the beauty in corruption and finding power in decay itself. Their forge complexes became places of pestilence where rust and corrosion were not fought but cultivated, where machine spirits were allowed to sicken and die so their degradation could be observed and understood. The technologies developed by Nurglite tech priests incorporated biological elements in ways that horrified even other members of the Dark Mechanicum. They created plague engines that spread diseases designed to corrode metal and corrupt machine spirits, turning enemy equipment against its operators through infection rather than conventional scrap code. Their demon engines wept toxic fluids that dissolved armor and caused machinery to rust and fail upon contact. They developed viral programs that infected not just individual machines, but entire manufacturing systems, causing production lines to create defective equipment that would fail at critical moments. These fallen tech priests saw their work as revealing deeper truths about the relationship between organic and mechanical systems, arguing that the Mechanicum's traditional separation of flesh and machine was artificial, and that true understanding required acknowledging the continuum between biological decay and mechanical failure. Slaanesh claimed those tech priests, whose pursuit of perfection and sensation led them into excess and obsession that transcended rational purpose. These servants of the Dark Prince sought to create the perfect machine, the ideal weapon, the flawless mechanism that would represent the absolute pinnacle of craftsmanship. Their initial goals seemed innocent enough, merely the natural desire of any artisan to produce work of the highest quality. But Slaanesh's influence twisted this drive into something pathological. They became unable to accept any imperfection, destroying months of work over microscopic flaws that would not affect function. They incorporated increasingly elaborate and unnecessary features into their designs, adding decorative elements and aesthetic refinements that served no practical purpose, but satisfied their need for beauty and complexity. Their creations became works of art rather than functional technology, weapons so ornate and perfect that using them in actual combat seemed like desecration. The demon engines created by Slaaneshi tech priests reflected their patrons' obsessions, incorporating sensory systems far beyond any practical military requirement. These machines could perceive reality across spectrums that served no tactical purpose, experiencing existence in ways that would drive unaugmented humans insane. Their weapons were designed not just to kill efficiently, but to create specific aesthetic effects, plasma weapons that painted the sky with colors that should not exist, or sonic cannons that produced harmonies that caused physical pain and psychological damage simultaneously. These tech priests argued that they were elevating warfare itself into an art form, that their creations represented the fusion of function and beauty that the Omnissiah would surely approve. They incorporated their own flesh into their machines in ways that went far beyond standard augmentation, merging with their creations until determining where the tech priest ended and the machine became impossible. Khorne's followers within the Dark Mechanicum represented the most straightforward corruption, as the blood god had little patience for the intellectual pretensions that characterized most tech priest research. Those who fell to Khorne's influence abandoned the quest for knowledge entirely, recognizing it as weakness that distracted from the only purpose that mattered: war. They transformed their forge complexes into weapons foundries dedicated to producing instruments of slaughter with no consideration for efficiency, elegance, or anything beyond raw destructive capability. Their demon engines were not sophisticated weapons platforms, but mobile altars to violence, machines that existed solely to kill and destroy. Where other Dark Mechanicum factions incorporated elaborate rituals and complex theological justifications into their work, Khornate tech priests simply built bigger guns, heavier armor, and more powerful engines. The corruption of Titan legions represented the Dark Mechanicum's most visible and devastating achievement. These god machines, which had served the Mechanicum faithfully for millennia, became hosts for greater demons bound into their structures through rituals that destroyed their machine spirits and replaced them with entities of pure warp stuff. A corrupted Titan retained its physical form and weapon systems, but operated according to principles that had nothing to do with proper machine function. Its plasma weapons fired bolts of warp energy that burned with unnatural colors. Its void shields flickered with images of screaming faces. Its war horns produced sounds that caused madness in those who heard them. The princeps who had once piloted these machines were either consumed entirely, their consciousness destroyed by the demon that took their place, or merged with the possessing entity in ways that created hybrid beings that were neither human nor demon, but something worse than either. The development of scrap code as a weapon system demonstrated how completely the Dark Mechanicum had abandoned proper technological practice. Traditional scrap code was malicious programming, dangerous certainly, but still fundamentally code that could be analyzed and countered through proper procedures. The scrap code developed by the traitor tech priests incorporated demonic elements that gave it properties no conventional program should possess. It spread through systems that had no network connections, jumping between isolated machines through mechanisms that defied analysis. It adapted to countermeasures in real time, evolving faster than loyalist tech priests could develop responses. Most disturbing, it seemed to possess actual malevolence, targeting critical systems with intelligence that suggested conscious direction rather than simple programming. Machine spirits infected by this corrupted scrap code did not simply malfunction. They turned hostile, their behavior suggesting genuine hatred for their operators and active desire to cause maximum harm. The hell forges that the Dark Mechanicum established within the Eye of Terror and other warp-touched regions represented the ultimate expression of their corruption. These facilities existed partially in real space and partially in the warp, their physical structures impossible to map because their layout changed based on factors that had nothing to do with conventional architecture. A corridor might lead to different destinations depending on the observer's thoughts or the current alignment of warp currents. Forge complexes the size of cities occupied spaces that should only hold single buildings. Time flowed inconsistently, with some areas experiencing centuries while others remained frozen in single moments. Tech priests working in these hell forges lost any connection to baseline reality, their augmented minds adapting to impossible conditions until they could no longer function in normal space. The freedom from standard template construct restrictions that Kelber Hal had promised his followers manifested in these hell forges as complete abandonment of any design principles or safety considerations. The Dark Mechanicum created technologies that violated natural law, devices that functioned through mechanisms that should not work, but did because warp energy substituted for conventional physics. They built weapons that fired projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, armor that phased between real space and the immaterium to avoid damage, and engines that drew power directly from the warp rather than conventional fuel sources. These creations proved devastatingly effective in combat, but required constant maintenance by tech priests who understood their impossible principles, and they tended to malfunction catastrophically when removed from warp-touched environments where the rules of reality were already compromised. The traitor forge worlds that declared for Kelber Hal during the heresy became staging grounds for Dark Mechanicum expansion. Their populations gradually corrupted through exposure to the technologies and practices their new masters introduced. A forge world might begin its fall by simply removing imperial restrictions on research, its tech priests telling themselves they were pursuing legitimate knowledge. Within years, warp-tainted artifacts would contaminate their archives, corrupted scrap code would infect their manufacturing systems, and demon engines would stalk their forge floors. The transformation occurred slowly enough that each step seemed reasonable, each compromise justifiable, until the forge world's entire population had fallen to chaos worship without most of them consciously recognizing what had happened. The Dark Mechanicum's relationship with the traitor legions proved complex and often contentious. The traitor space marines needed the weapons and equipment that only Mechanicum forges could produce, but they distrusted the tech priests whose methods seemed to rely more on sorcery than proper technology. Dark Mechanicum forces accompanied traitor fleets during the heresy, maintaining equipment and providing technical expertise, but tensions frequently erupted into violence when space marines objected to the increasingly corrupt nature of the machinery they were being given. A weapon that incorporated bound demons might prove more effective than conventional equivalents, but it also required rituals to activate and tended to consume its wielder's soul if used improperly. Traitor legionnaires who had not fully embraced chaos worship found themselves caught between needing Dark Mechanicum support and being horrified by what their supposed allies had become. The Siege of Terra saw Dark Mechanicum forces deployed alongside traitor space marines and corrupted Imperial army regiments, their demon engines and corrupted titans adding firepower that nearly broke the Imperial Palace's defenses. But the heresy's failure and Horus's death scattered the traitor forces, forcing the Dark Mechanicum to retreat into the Eye of Terror and other warp storms where they could continue their work beyond Imperial reach. The hell forges they established in these regions became permanent installations, their production capacity dedicated to supplying the traitor legions and other chaos forces with weapons and equipment for their ongoing war against the Imperium. 10,000 years after the heresy's end, these corrupted forge complexes continue operating, their output fueling black crusades and smaller raids that emerge from the Eye of Terror to strike at Imperial worlds. The most disturbing theory regarding the Omnissiah's true nature originates not from theological debate or political calculation, but from ancient legends that suggest something far older than humanity sleeps beneath Mars's surface. Deep within the Noctis Labyrinthus, a vast canyon system in Mars's equatorial region that predates human colonization, forbidden archives contain fragmentary references to an entity imprisoned in the planet's depths during Earth's ancient past. These references, dismissed by most tech priests as corrupted data or metaphorical mythology, describe a being of immense power associated with technology and the manipulation of matter at fundamental levels. The entity's name appears in various forms across different texts, but the most common designation translates as the Dragon of Mars or simply the Void Dragon. The legend claims that the Emperor himself imprisoned this entity beneath Mars during humanity's prehistory, long before the Age of Strife or even the Dark Age of technology. According to these accounts, the creature threatened Earth during an era when humans still lived in primitive conditions, wielding powers over technology and energy that seemed godlike to early human civilizations. The Emperor, already ancient even then, and possessing capabilities that would not be fully revealed until the Unification Wars, confronted this entity in a battle that scarred the landscape and left legends that would persist in distorted form throughout human history. The accounts describe how the Emperor did not destroy the creature, but instead imprisoned it deep beneath what would later become Mars, binding it with wards and seals that would contain its influence for millennia. The connection between this imprisoned entity and the Khatan becomes apparent when examining what little information the Imperium has gathered about these ancient beings. The Khatan, or star gods, represent entities that predate organic life in the galaxy, creatures of living energy that fed on stars and possessed mastery over fundamental physical forces. The Necrons, the ancient Xenos race that once ruled vast portions of the galaxy before entering their long sleep, worshipped and served these beings before eventually finding ways to shatter them into smaller fragments. Each Khatan possessed dominion over specific aspects of reality, their powers focused on particular forces or phenomena. The Deceiver specialized in manipulation and illusion. The Nightbringer embodied death and fear. And one Khatan, known in Necron records by designations that translate poorly into human languages, commanded absolute mastery over energy and matter, able to reshape physical reality through will alone. This particular Khatan, if the fragmentary accounts can be trusted, became known as the Void Dragon, or the Dragon of Mars in human mythology. Its powers over technology and material manipulation would explain many mysteries that have plagued the Mechanicum since its founding. The theory suggests that the presence of this Khatan shard, imprisoned but not completely dormant beneath Mars, influenced the human colonists who settled the Red Planet during humanity's first expansion into the solar system. The colonists' gradual shift toward machine worship, their development of religious practices centered on technology, and their eventual formation of the Cult Mechanicus might not have been organic developments born from practical necessity during the Age of Strife. Instead, these beliefs could represent the psychic influence of the imprisoned Khatan, its consciousness reaching out from its prison to shape human thoughts and behaviors in ways that served its nature. The implications of this theory fundamentally challenge everything the Mechanicum believes about the machine god. If the entity imprisoned beneath Mars is indeed a Khatan shard, then the machine god that tech priests worship is not the Emperor, not some abstract divine force permeating all technology, but an ancient Xenos entity that predates humanity by millions of years. The machine spirits that tech priests commune with might be echoes of the Void Dragon's influence rather than genuine divine presences. The quest for knowledge that drives all Mechanicum activity could be the Khatan's will expressing itself through its unwitting worshippers, pushing them to advance human technology in ways that might eventually serve the imprisoned entity's purposes. Every prayer offered to the machine god, every ritual performed in forged temples across the Imperium, might actually be feeding power to a Xenos creature whose goals and nature remain fundamentally alien to human understanding. The Void Dragon's nature as a Khatan associated with energy manipulation and technological mastery provides disturbing explanations for phenomena that tech priests attribute to divine intervention. The machine spirits that inhabit all technology could be fragments of the Khatan's consciousness, its awareness distributed across the machinery that humans create and use. This would explain why proper rituals and reverent treatment improve machine performance beyond what technical specifications would predict. The machines are not responding to human devotion, but to the resonance between proper maintenance procedures and the patterns that the Void Dragon's influence has embedded in human technological development. When a tech priest successfully repairs ancient technology through ritual and prayer, they might be accessing knowledge implanted in their unconscious minds by the imprisoned entity, their religious practices serving as the psychological framework that allows them to tap into understanding they do not consciously possess. The Necrons' technological supremacy, which far exceeds anything humanity achieved even during the Dark Age of technology, derived directly from their service to the Khatan. The star gods granted their Necron-tier servants mastery over physical laws, teaching them to manipulate matter and energy in ways that seemed like magic to lesser species. Weapons that stripped targets from existence, armor that phased between dimensions, and engines that violated thermodynamic principles all emerged from knowledge the Khatan possessed inherently. If the Void Dragon represents the Khatan most associated with these technological achievements, then its imprisonment beneath Mars places the source of the Necron's greatest strengths directly beneath the Mechanicum's holiest site. The technology that tech priests worship and seek to understand might be pale imitations of capabilities that the entity beneath their feet could grant if it were ever freed from its prison. The question of who knows this truth proves as disturbing as the theory itself. Did the Emperor understand what he was imprisoning when he bound the void dragon beneath Mars? The accounts suggest he fought and imprisoned the entity during Earth's ancient past, which implies he knew exactly what it was and chose Mars as its prison for specific reasons. Perhaps he calculated that having the Khatan shard beneath Mars would influence human colonists in ways that would benefit humanity's long-term survival. The development of the Cult Mechanicus, with its focus on preserving and maintaining technology, might have been exactly what he intended when he placed the Void Dragon where it could subtly affect human consciousness. The Treaty of Mars and his acceptance of the Omnissiah title take on new dimensions if he knew that the machine god the tech priests worshipped was actually a Khatan shard he had imprisoned millennia earlier. Alternatively, the Emperor might have had no choice about where to imprison the entity. The Void Dragon's power over technology and matter could have made it impossible to destroy completely, forcing him to settle for containment. Mars, with its distance from Earth and its eventual role as humanity's industrial center, might have been selected because concentrating human technological development around the Khatan's prison would allow him to monitor the entity's influence more effectively. Every forge complex built on Mars, every excavation into the planet's depths, and every tech priest studying ancient technology would be unwittingly serving as sensors that could detect if the Void Dragon's prison was weakening, or if its influence was growing beyond acceptable parameters. The Fabricator General's knowledge of this truth remains unknown and possibly unknowable. The position's holders throughout history might have been initiated into this secret upon their elevation, learning that the machine god they had worshipped their entire lives was actually a Xenos entity imprisoned beneath their feet. This revelation would explain the curious theological flexibility that Fabricators General have demonstrated throughout Mechanicum history, their willingness to accept the Emperor as Omnissiah despite the logical inconsistencies this creates. If they know the truth about the Void Dragon, then acknowledging the Emperor as Omnissiah becomes a political necessity rather than a theological position. The Emperor imprisoned the entity and maintains its containment. Opposing him risks the prison's integrity, potentially freeing the Khatan shard to wreak havoc across the solar system. Alternatively, the secret might be so closely guarded that even the Fabricator General remains ignorant. A small cabal of the most senior tech priests, perhaps descendants of those who first discovered evidence of the Void Dragon's existence, could maintain this knowledge across generations while deliberately keeping it from the broader Mechanicum hierarchy. They would recognize that revealing the truth would shatter the Cult Mechanicus, destroying the religious framework that has sustained Martian civilization since the Age of Strife. Better to let the priesthood continue worshipping what they believe is the machine god than to reveal that their devotion serves a Xenos entity whose true nature and goals remain incomprehensible to human minds. The Noctis Labyrinthus itself provides circumstantial evidence supporting the Void Dragon theory. This region of Mars has remained largely unexplored despite 10,000 years of Mechanicum presence on the planet. Excavation teams that venture too deep into certain areas report equipment malfunctions that defy explanation, their machinery failing despite proper maintenance and appeasement of machine spirits. Tech priests who spend extended periods in the deepest sections of the labyrinthus sometimes return changed, their understanding of technology advanced in ways they cannot explain or teach to others. Some never return at all, their expeditions disappearing into tunnels that subsequent searches cannot locate. The Mechanicum maintains quarantine zones throughout the region, areas where access is forbidden even to senior magi without explicit authorization from the Fabricator General. These restricted zones ostensibly exist to protect dangerous archaeotech or unstable geological formations, but their placement follows patterns that suggest something else entirely. The quarantines form rough concentric circles around a central point deep beneath the labyrinthus, as if marking safe distances from something at the pattern's heart. Auger scans of the region produce contradictory results, their readings suggesting impossible geological formations or energy signatures that should not exist. Some tech priests who have examined these scans claim they show a massive structure buried kilometers beneath the surface, its dimensions and composition unlike anything in Mechanicum records. Others insist the readings are artifacts of interference from Mars's magnetic field or residual radiation from ancient weapons used during the Age of Strife. The legitimacy of the entire Cult Mechanicus hinges on this question in ways that most tech priests never consciously consider. If the machine god is truly the emperor, then the Mechanicum's theological framework aligns with imperial truth in awkward but sustainable ways. The emperor represents the Omnissiah, the physical manifestation of divine will, and serving him constitutes proper worship regardless of his own rejection of divinity. If the machine god is an abstract force permeating all technology, then the Mechanicum maintains legitimate religious independence from the Imperium, their faith focused on something genuinely separate from imperial authority. But if the machine god is actually the Void Dragon, if 10,000 years of worship and devotion have been directed toward a Xenos entity imprisoned beneath Mars, then the Mechanicum's entire existence represents a cosmic deception of staggering proportions. This possibility explains certain theological peculiarities that have troubled Mechanicum scholars throughout their history. The machine god's nature remains frustratingly vague despite millennia of study and contemplation. Attempts to systematically define its attributes or establish consistent doctrine about it will produce contradictory results that different forge complexes resolve in incompatible ways. The relationship between the machine god and the Omnissiah has never been satisfactorily explained, with various theological schools offering interpretations that range from the Omnissiah being an avatar of the machine god to the two being essentially identical to the Omnissiah being merely the machine god's prophet. These inconsistencies make sense if the machine god is actually a Khatan whose nature fundamentally defies human comprehension, and whose influence on human consciousness produces religious experiences that cannot be reconciled into coherent theology. The Void Dragon's potential influence on human technological development extends beyond Mars to encompass all of human civilization. If the Khatan Shard has been affecting human consciousness since before the Age of Strife, then humanity's entire relationship with technology might be shaped by its will. The standard template construct systems, those repositories of Dark Age knowledge that the Mechanicum considers their holiest relics, could incorporate design principles that the Void Dragon influenced their creators to include. The technologies that humanity developed during its height, the weapons and machines that allowed humans to conquer thousands of worlds, might all reflect the Khatan's preferences and purposes. Every forge world, every manufacturing complex, and every tech priest studying ancient technology could be unwittingly advancing goals that serve an entity whose plans operate on timescales measured in millions of years. The demon engines created by the Dark Mechanicum take on new significance when considered in light of the Void Dragon theory. If machine spirits are actually fragments of Khatan consciousness, then binding demons into machinery represents a direct conflict between chaos entities and pieces of the Void Dragon's awareness. The corrupted scrap code that the traitor tech priests developed might work by exploiting this conflict, using warp energies to disrupt the Khatan's influence and allowing chaos to claim machines that would otherwise resist demonic possession. The Dark Mechanicum's fall into chaos worship could be interpreted as their unconscious rejection of the Void Dragon's control, their corruption by the ruinous powers freeing them from the Khatan's subtle influence at the cost of enslaving them to different masters entirely. The Titan Legions stand as the most visible manifestation of the Omnissiah's power, god machines that tower over battlefields like walking cathedrals of destruction. These colossal war engines represent the pinnacle of the Mechanicum's manufacturing capabilities and the most sacred expression of their covenant with the machine god. Each Titan embodies millennia of accumulated knowledge, its construction requiring resources that could equip entire Imperial Guard regiments and expertise possessed by only the most skilled artisans. The smallest scout Titans stand 15 meters tall, their weapons capable of reducing tanks to slag, and their void shields deflecting fire that would obliterate lesser vehicles. The largest Emperor-class Titans reach heights exceeding 50 meters, mobile fortresses bristling with plasma annihilators, volcano cannons, and defensive batteries that could level cities. These god machines stride across worlds with footfalls that shake the earth, their war horns announcing the Omnissiah's judgment upon those who oppose the Mechanicum's will. The Collegia Titanica organizes these war machines into legions, each with its own history, heraldry, and traditions stretching back to Mars's earliest days. The Legio Ignatum, the Fire Wasps, trace their lineage to the first Titans constructed during humanity's colonization of Mars, their engine kills numbering in the thousands across 10 millennia of warfare. The Legio Mortis, the Death's Heads, earned their reputation during the Great Crusade by breaking fortress worlds that had resisted conventional assault for years. Each legion maintains its own forge complex where their Titans are housed, maintained, and revered as the sacred mechanisms they are. These facilities function simultaneously as military bases, temples, and museums, their halls lined with battle honors and relics recovered from campaigns dating back to the Age of Strife. The tech priests who serve these legions dedicate their entire lives to maintaining and appeasing the machine spirits of their charges, performing rituals that can take days to complete before a Titan is deemed ready for deployment. The princeps who pilot these god machines undergo transformation that goes far beyond standard tech priest augmentation. Neural interface systems called manifold imperative links connect the princeps directly to their Titan systems, allowing human consciousness to merge with the machine's spirit in ways that blur the distinction between pilot and vehicle. A princeps does not control their Titan through conventional means, but becomes one with it, their thoughts translating directly into the god machine's movements, while the Titan's sensory input floods their consciousness. This connection proves so intense that princeps cannot maintain it for extended periods without suffering psychological damage. The machine's spirit's alien consciousness presses against their minds constantly, its hunger for battle and destruction threatening to overwhelm human rationality. Princeps who survive long enough develop personalities that incorporate aspects of their Titan's machine spirit, their behavior growing increasingly aggressive, and their thoughts turning constantly toward warfare, even when disconnected from their engines. The process of becoming a princeps begins with selection from among tech priests who demonstrate both exceptional neural compatibility and psychological resilience. Candidates undergo years of training where they learn to interface with progressively larger machines, starting with simple vehicles and working up to scout Titans. Many fail during this process, their minds unable to withstand the pressure of merging with machine spirits or their neural architecture incompatible with the interface systems. Those who succeed receive extensive augmentation that replaces portions of their brains with cybernetic systems designed to handle the massive data flow that Titan operation requires. Additional implants throughout their bodies allow them to process the sensory information from their Titan systems, translating readings from auger arrays, weapon targeting systems, and structural integrity monitors into forms their consciousness can interpret. The Moderati who support each princeps serve as the link between the pilot's vision and the Titan's actual capabilities. These officers, typically 2 per Titan though larger engines might carry more, handle specific weapon systems and secondary functions while the princeps maintains overall control and coordination. A Moderati Primus might manage the Titan's primary armament, calculating firing solutions, and adjusting power distribution to weapon systems based on tactical requirements. A Moderati Secunda handles defensive systems, managing void shield frequencies and coordinating point defense weapons against incoming fire. These positions require their own neural interfaces, though less intense than the princeps's connection, allowing Moderati to access their assigned systems while remaining anchored in human consciousness. The relationship between princeps and Moderati proves crucial to a Titan's effectiveness, as the crew must function as a single unit despite the psychological strain of their neural connections. The Skitarii legions form the Mechanicum's ground forces, armies of cybernetically enhanced warriors who serve as the militant arm of the machine god's will. Unlike the Imperial Guard regiments that fight for the Emperor, Skitarii owe allegiance exclusively to the Mechanicum and deploy wherever tech priests require military force to achieve their objectives. These soldiers undergo extensive modification that transforms them from baseline humans into living weapons optimized for specific combat roles. The augmentation process begins with basic enhancements common to all Skitarii: reinforced skeletal structures, enhanced musculature through myomer fiber implants, and sensory upgrades that improve reaction times and situational awareness. Additional modifications depend on the soldier's designated role within their cohort, with specialists receiving equipment and augmentations tailored to their specific function. The Doctrina imperatives represent the most controversial aspect of Skitarii operations: override protocols that suppress individual consciousness and replace it with programmed responses optimized for specific tactical situations. When a tech priest activates these imperatives, the affected Skitarii lose their ability to make independent decisions, their actions controlled entirely by pre-programmed behavioral patterns. An aggressive imperative might enhance combat effectiveness by eliminating fear and hesitation, transforming Skitarii into relentless killing machines that advance regardless of casualties. A defensive imperative could optimize positioning and fire discipline, turning individual soldiers into components of a larger defensive system that responds to threats with mechanical precision. The imperatives allow tech priests to coordinate large Skitarii formations with perfect synchronization, as every soldier responds to commands and tactical situations according to identical programming. The ethical implications of the Doctrina imperatives trouble even some members of the Mechanicum, as their use reduces thinking beings to biological automatons little different from servitors. Skitarii affected by active imperatives cannot retreat, cannot question orders, and cannot adapt to situations their programming does not anticipate. They fight until their bodies fail or their handlers deactivate the imperatives, their consciousness suppressed beneath layers of override code. Tech priests justify this practice through theological arguments emphasizing that flesh's weakness includes emotional responses that compromise tactical effectiveness. Fear, doubt, and self-preservation instincts serve no purpose in warfare and actually reduce combat efficiency. The imperatives simply optimize Skitarii performance by eliminating these biological limitations, allowing the soldiers to function as the machine god intended. Skitarii Rangers specialize in long-range reconnaissance and precision fire, their augmentations focused on enhancing sensory capabilities and accuracy. These soldiers carry galvanic rifles, weapons that fire armor-penetrating rounds accelerated by electromagnetic coils to velocities that allow them to punch through heavy armor at extreme ranges. Their optical implants incorporate targeting systems that calculate ballistic trajectories automatically, adjusting for wind, gravity, and target movement to ensure first-round hits at distances exceeding a kilometer. Rangers operate in small squads that deploy ahead of main Mechanicum forces, gathering intelligence on enemy positions and eliminating high-value targets before conventional assault begins. Their neural augmentations include enhanced pattern recognition systems that allow them to spot camouflaged enemies or identify weaknesses in fortifications that less sophisticated sensors might miss. The Vanguard represent the opposite tactical doctrine: close assault specialists equipped with radium carbines and radiation field generators that make them lethal at short ranges. These weapons emit focused radiation that causes catastrophic cellular damage in organic targets, literally cooking enemies from the inside as their tissues absorb lethal doses in seconds. The Vanguard themselves carry radiation shielding and enhanced healing systems that allow them to operate in environments that would kill unprotected humans within minutes. Their augmentations include reinforced organs resistant to radiation damage and enhanced immune systems that can repair cellular destruction faster than it accumulates. Vanguard squads advance directly into enemy fire, their their rad saturation fields weakening opponents before close combat begins, while their carbines scythe through infantry formations at ranges where conventional weapons prove most effective. Sicarian infiltrators and rust stalkers represent the Skitari's elite assassination and terror units, warriors modified so extensively that they barely qualify as human anymore. Infiltrators receive neurostatic fields that scramble enemy communications and targeting systems, their very presence disrupting electronic warfare systems through electromagnetic interference they generate constantly. Their weapons incorporate taser goads and fléchette blasters designed for close-quarters combat in confined spaces where conventional firearms prove unwieldy. The modifications required for infiltrator service include complete replacement of their respiratory systems with rebreather units that allow operation in vacuum or toxic atmospheres, and extensive neural augmentation that enhances their already formidable combat reflexes to superhuman levels. Rust stalkers take this transformation further, becoming living weapons whose sole purpose involves close combat assassination. Their hands mount transonic blades, weapons that vibrate at frequencies that disrupt molecular bonds and allow them to cut through armor that would resist conventional blades. Cordclaw attachments incorporate grappling systems that let them scale vertical surfaces and close with enemies who attempt to maintain distance. The psychological conditioning rust stalkers undergo suppresses their emotional responses even without doctrina imperatives active, creating soldiers who approach combat with mechanical efficiency regardless of circumstances. Their sensory augmentations focus on threat detection and target acquisition, with sophisticated audio processors that can track enemies through walls by analyzing sound patterns and thermal sensors that detect body heat signatures through intervening obstacles. The Questorus Knights occupy a unique position within the Mechanicum's military hierarchy, towering war machines that bridge the gap between Titans and conventional vehicles. These bipedal engines stand roughly half a Titan's height, their weapons including thermal cannons, rapid-fire battle cannons, and close combat chainswords large enough to bisect tanks. Unlike Titans, which belong entirely to the Mechanicum through the Collegia Titanica, Knights come from feudal worlds where noble houses maintain these ancient machines as hereditary responsibilities passed from parent to child across generations. The Knight worlds developed during humanity's colonization of the galaxy, isolated settlements that received Knight suits as protection against local threats, and maintained them through the Age of Strife when contact with the rest of humanity ceased. The Throne Mechanicum that allows nobles to pilot their knights functions similarly to a Titan's neural interface, but incorporates additional systems that create permanent bonds between pilot and machine. When a young noble first sits in their family's throne, the interface establishes neural pathways that will remain for their entire life, linking their consciousness to the knight's machine spirit in ways that cannot be severed. This bonding process proves dangerous, as incompatible pilots can suffer brain death when the throne rejects them, or the machine spirit finds their consciousness unsuitable. Noble houses maintain careful genetic records tracking which bloodlines produce successful pilots, arranging marriages to preserve traits that ensure compatibility with their knights. The throne itself becomes part of the pilot's identity, their thoughts influenced by the machine spirit's presence even when they are not actively piloting their engine. The distinction between Mechanicus-aligned and Imperial-aligned knight houses creates complex political situations that occasionally erupt into actual conflict. Houses that swore allegiance to the Mechanicum during the Great Crusade or earlier maintained close relationships with Forge Worlds, their knights receiving maintenance and upgrades from tech priests in exchange for military service when the Mechanicum requires their support. These houses often adopt Mechanicum religious practices, their nobles venerating the machine god and incorporating tech priests into their courts as advisors and spiritual guides. Imperial-aligned houses maintain their oaths to the Imperium directly, their knights deploying alongside Imperial Guard regiments and answering to Imperial commanders rather than Mechanicum authorities. These houses typically preserve their own religious traditions, many worshipping the Emperor as a divine figure, while maintaining respectful but distant relationships with the Mechanicum. The sacristans who maintain knights occupy an intermediate position between tech priests and traditional engineers, individuals trained in knight maintenance but not necessarily inducted into the full Mechanicum priesthood. These specialists understand the rituals and procedures required to keep knights operational, performing the sacred rites that appease machine spirits while conducting physical repairs and system upgrades. A knight house's sacristans form a hereditary caste within the world's society, their knowledge passed from master to apprentice across generations. They maintain workshops where knights undergo regular maintenance between deployments, their facilities filled with specialized tools and blessed components required for proper upkeep. The relationship between sacristans and the nobles who pilot knights proves crucial to maintaining these war machines, as pilots must trust their sacristans completely, while sacristans must understand their charges' combat styles and preferences to optimize their knight's performance. The Cult Mechanicus vessels represent mobile forge worlds, massive ships that combine military capabilities with industrial production facilities. These vessels dwarf conventional warships, their hulls measuring tens of kilometers in length and incorporating manufacturing complexes that could supply entire crusade fleets. An Cult Mechanicus carries forges capable of producing everything from small arms to void-capable fighters, its internal spaces organized into districts that function as self-contained industrial zones. Tech priests aboard these vessels number in the hundreds of thousands, their specialized skills ensuring the Ark can manufacture whatever its mission requires. The ships themselves incorporate technologies recovered from the Dark Age of technology, their systems so complex that even their tech priest crews do not fully understand all their capabilities. Some Arks possess weapons that violate known physical principles, firing projectiles that phase through void shields or generating energy fields that disable enemy vessels without causing physical damage. The forge worlds that dot the Imperium serve as permanent centers of Mechanicum power, entire planets transformed into massive manufacturing complexes dedicated to producing the weapons and equipment that sustain Imperial military forces. Each forge world specializes in particular technologies based on the knowledge its tech priests possess and the resources available in their system. Graia produces plasma weapons and power armor, its forges having preserved manufacturing techniques for these sophisticated systems since before the heresy. Metallica specializes in vehicle production, its assembly lines churning out tanks and transports in quantities that supply multiple segmentums. Ryza focuses on plasma technology, their expertise in containing and directing superheated matter, making them the primary source for plasma weapons throughout the Imperium. These specializations create interdependence between forge worlds, as no single planet possesses the knowledge and resources to produce everything the Mechanicum requires. Trade networks spanning the Imperium move components and finished products between forge worlds, with Mechanicum vessels carrying cargo that sustains both their own operations and Imperial military campaigns. The transformation of a world into a forge world requires centuries of effort and resources that would beggar entire sectors. The process begins with massive strip mining operations that extract every useful mineral from the planet's crust, leaving behind landscapes of bare rock and toxic waste. Manufacturing complexes rise across the surface, their foundations driven deep into the bedrock to support structures that can reach kilometers into the sky. Orbital facilities supplement ground-based production, with shipyards and zero-gravity foundries producing components that cannot be manufactured under planetary gravity. The planet's atmosphere typically becomes toxic within decades, as industrial processes release pollutants faster than any environmental systems can process them. Forge world populations adapt through augmentation and sealed habitation zones, their lives spent entirely within climate-controlled facilities where air and water undergo constant filtration and recycling. The explorator fleets represent the Mechanicum's most ambitious expression of the quest for knowledge, massive expeditions that venture beyond the Imperium's borders into regions where human civilization has never reached, or where it collapsed so completely during the Age of Strife that no records of its existence remain. These fleets operate under different mandates than standard Imperial exploration forces. Where the Imperium seeks habitable worlds for colonization and resources for exploitation, the explorator fleets hunt for technology. Their primary targets are standard template construct systems, those legendary repositories of Dark Age knowledge that could transform the Imperium's technological capabilities overnight. Secondary objectives include recovering any archaeotech from abandoned human colonies, investigating Xeno's ruins that might contain technologies worth studying, and cataloging phenomena that could advance Mechanicum understanding of physical principles. An explorator fleet typically centers on an Cult Mechanicus, that vessel's massive industrial capacity, allowing the expedition to remain self-sufficient for decades or even centuries away from Mechanicum support. Surrounding the Ark travel escorts ranging from heavily armed cruisers to specialized survey vessels equipped with auger arrays that can detect technological signatures across entire star systems. The fleet carries thousands of tech priests representing every major specialization within the Mechanicum. Janitors analyze biological samples from newly discovered worlds, searching for organisms that might possess useful genetic traits or evidence of human genetic engineering from the Dark Age. Artisans stand ready to reverse engineer recovered technology, their workshops aboard the Ark equipped to handle everything from simple mechanical devices to sophisticated systems incorporating principles the Mechanicum no longer fully understands. Lex mechanics specialize in decoding ancient data formats and translating technical documentation from languages and symbolic systems that have been dead for millennia. The Skitarii contingents aboard explorator fleets number in the tens of thousands, as these expeditions frequently encounter hostile forces that must be neutralized before archaeological work can proceed. Orc-infested space hulks might contain human technology worth recovering, but extracting it requires clearing out the Xeno's presence first. Worlds that maintained human civilization through the Age of Strife sometimes developed their own technological traditions that they defend violently against outsiders attempting to claim their secrets. Necron Tomb worlds, those deadly repositories of Xeno's technology that predate human civilization by millions of years, occasionally yield artifacts that tech priests dare to study despite the extreme dangers involved. The military forces accompanying explorator fleets prepare for combat operations ranging from boarding actions against derelict vessels to planetary assaults against fortified positions, protecting valuable archaeological sites. The search patterns explorator fleets employ combine systematic survey techniques with investigation of promising leads from ancient records. Some expeditions follow fragmentary references in pre-strife documents, chasing mentions of colony worlds or research stations that might have survived the collapse of human civilization. Others conduct methodical sweeps of regions where human expansion during the Dark Age of technology is known to have occurred, scanning every system for signs of human habitation or technological activity. The most ambitious expeditions venture into completely unexplored regions, their tech priests hoping to discover human colonies that developed in complete isolation and might have preserved knowledge lost elsewhere. These deep-range explorations can last for centuries, with multiple generations of tech priests born, augmented, and dying aboard the fleet without ever setting foot on a Mechanicum world. The theological significance of standard template construct systems to the Mechanicum cannot be overstated. These devices represent the absolute pinnacle of human technological achievement, created during the Dark Age of technology, when humanity commanded powers that the 41st millennium can barely comprehend. An SDC contained complete manufacturing specifications for every technology human civilization required, from agricultural equipment to void-capable warships. The templates were not simple blueprints, but comprehensive databases that included material specifications, manufacturing procedures, quality control protocols, and maintenance instructions. More sophisticated SDCs incorporated expert systems that could analyze local resources and modify designs to optimize performance based on available materials. A colony ship carrying a complete SDC could establish a fully functional industrial civilization on a virgin world within a generation, its settlers able to manufacture everything they needed without requiring additional support from Earth or other established worlds. The SDC systems achieved this through a combination of advanced materials science, sophisticated manufacturing techniques, and design principles that prioritized reliability and ease of production over cutting-edge performance. A weapon designed according to SDC principles might not represent the absolute theoretical maximum of destructive capability, but it could be manufactured using commonly available materials with equipment that was itself reproducible from the SDC database. This recursive capability meant that a single SDC could bootstrap an entire technological civilization from primitive conditions, each generation of tools and machines enabling the production of more sophisticated equipment until the full range of human technology became available. The systems incorporated safeguards against technological regression, with multiple redundant storage methods ensuring that knowledge would not be lost even if primary systems failed. The Age of Strife destroyed this carefully constructed system. Warp storms isolated human worlds from each other, cutting off the communication networks that had allowed SDC systems to receive updates and share improvements across human space. Colonies that had relied on their SDCs suddenly found themselves dependent on devices they did not fully understand, as the expert systems that had guided their ancestors through the manufacturing processes began to malfunction or provide contradictory instructions. Some SDCs were deliberately destroyed during the wars and catastrophes that consumed human civilization, their knowledge lost when desperate defenders chose to deny their enemies access rather than allow the systems to fall into hostile hands. Others degraded gradually as their physical storage media deteriorated without proper maintenance, corruption spreading through their databases until the information they contained became unreliable or completely unusable. By the time the Emperor began the Great Crusade, complete SDCs had become legends. The Mechanicum's most intensive searches throughout the solar system had recovered only fragments, partial databases containing specifications for individual devices, or incomplete manufacturing procedures that tech priests spent centuries attempting to reconstruct. Each fragment represented a treasure beyond measure, as even corrupted or incomplete SDC data provided insights that could advance Mechanicum understanding in specific fields. A fragment containing partial specifications for a power generation system might include material formulations that improved efficiency by percentages that seemed trivial but translated into significant performance gains when applied to reactors powering entire forge complexes. Manufacturing procedures from SDC databases often incorporated steps that seemed unnecessary to tech priests analyzing them, but proved crucial when attempting to replicate the results, revealing principles that human understanding had not yet rediscovered. The Land Raiders' discovery illustrates both the importance of SDC fragments and the complex relationship between rediscovery and invention within Mechanicum culture. Arkin Land, a technorchaeologist serving on Mars during the latter years of the Great Crusade, located a partial SDC database in a previously unexplored section of the Librarius Omnis, one of Mars's great archives. The fragment contained specifications for an armored transport vehicle designed to carry troops through hostile environments while providing fire support. Land did not invent this vehicle, but rather reconstructed it from the fragmentary specifications, filling gaps in the data through educated guesswork and application of related principles from other recovered templates. The resulting vehicle proved so successful that it entered widespread production, becoming one of the Space Marine Legion's primary armored transports. The Mechanicum named it the Land Raider in recognition of its discoverer, though Land himself maintained that he had merely recovered knowledge that humanity's ancestors had created millennia earlier. This pattern repeats throughout Mechanicum history. The Rhino armored personnel carrier, the Predator tank, and countless other vehicles trace their origins to SDC fragments recovered from various sources and painstakingly reconstructed by tech priests who spent decades or centuries working from incomplete data. Each successful reconstruction reinforces the Mechanicum's theological position that true innovation is actually rediscovery, that the ancestors of the dark age of technology had already solved every problem and created every tool humanity would ever need. The role of modern tech priests is not to invent new solutions, but to recover the perfect solutions that already exist in fragmentary form, scattered across the galaxy in damaged SDCs and corrupted databases waiting to be found and restored. This theological framework creates profound tensions within the Mechanicum between the practical necessity of adapting existing technology to new situations and the religious prohibition against genuine innovation. A tech priest who modifies an SDC pattern to improve its performance in specific conditions walks a dangerous line between acceptable optimization and heretical innovation. The Mechanicum distinguishes between sanctioned modifications that remain within established principles and tech heresy that introduces fundamentally new concepts not derived from recovered knowledge. A Magos who adjusts power distribution in a plasma weapon to improve its rate of fire operates within acceptable bounds, as they are optimizing an existing design rather than creating something new. A tech priest who develops an entirely novel weapon system using principles not found in any SDC fragment or recovered archaeotech risks accusations of tech heresy, their work potentially subject to investigation and suppression regardless of its practical effectiveness. The most conservative factions within the Mechanicum argue that any deviation from recovered SDC patterns constitutes heresy, that the ancestors' designs represent perfection that cannot be improved upon. These traditionalists point to numerous examples throughout imperial history where attempts to modify or improve SDC-derived technology led to catastrophic failures. Weapons that worked reliably for millennia suddenly developed critical flaws when tech priests attempted to increase their output beyond design specifications. Manufacturing processes that had produced consistent results for generations began yielding defective products when well-meaning artisans tried to streamline them by eliminating steps they considered redundant. These failures reinforce the theological position that the ancestors understood principles modern tech priests can barely grasp, that what appears to be unnecessary complexity in SDC designs actually serves crucial functions that become apparent only when removed. More progressive elements within the Mechanicum counter that absolute adherence to ancient patterns would doom humanity to technological stagnation in a galaxy where new threats constantly emerge. The Tyranids, that extragalactic horror that began invading imperial space in the 41st millennium, possess biological weapons and armor that SDC-era humanity never encountered. Defending against these threats requires adapting existing technologies in ways their original designers never anticipated. Similarly, the Tau Empire's rapid technological advancement presents challenges that demand responses beyond simply deploying millennia-old weapons, according to ancient tactical doctrines. These pragmatists argue that the quest for knowledge must include understanding the principles behind recovered technology well enough to apply them to new situations, that the ancestors would have expected their descendants to think rather than mindlessly following instructions without comprehension. The debate extends to how the Mechanicum should treat technological knowledge from non-human sources. Eldar technology operates on principles fundamentally different from human engineering, incorporating psychic elements and materials that exist partially in the warp. Studying such devices could potentially advance Mechanicum understanding of fields where human knowledge remains limited, but it also risks contamination of pure human technological traditions with Xenos concepts. The most extreme conservatives within the Mechanicum maintain that all Xenos technology should be destroyed upon discovery, that studying it constitutes a form of tech heresy that pollutes the purity of human knowledge with alien corruption. Moderates argue for careful examination of Xenos devices to understand their principles, which might reveal natural laws that human science has not yet discovered. The most radical tech priests suggest that technology itself transcends species boundaries, that the physical principles governing how devices function remain constant regardless of who designed them, and that refusing to learn from any source of knowledge betrays the fundamental purpose of the quest. Necron technology presents particularly acute dilemmas for tech priests who encounter it. These Xenos devices incorporate materials and operating principles that seem to violate fundamental physical laws, weapons that erase matter from existence and armor that phases between dimensions to avoid damage. The technology clearly works, demonstrating capabilities that exceed anything in the Mechanicum's arsenal, yet studying it requires handling devices created by Xenos whose civilization predates humanity by millions of years. Some tech priests who have examined Necron artifacts report that the technology feels wrong in ways they struggle to articulate, as if the devices operate according to rules that should not exist. Others become obsessed with understanding these impossible mechanisms, their research consuming decades as they attempt to reconcile Necron engineering principles with human scientific understanding. The Mechanicum officially prohibits detailed study of Necron technology, classifying it as dangerous Xenos artifacts that should be destroyed rather than preserved, but enforcement of this prohibition varies widely between different Forge worlds and individual magi. The practical reality of the Imperium's technological situation forces compromises that theological purists find uncomfortable. The Imperium cannot produce many technologies that were common during the Great Crusade, their manufacturing requiring knowledge or materials that no longer exist in sufficient quantities. Terminator armor, those suits that transform space marines into walking fortresses, can no longer be manufactured in significant numbers because the Mechanicum has lost the ability to produce several critical components. Existing suits are maintained and repaired with almost religious devotion, but each one destroyed in combat represents an irreplaceable loss. Similar limitations affect plasma weapons, sophisticated sensor systems, and various other technologies, where the Mechanicum possesses STC fragments describing what the finished product should be, but lacks complete understanding of how to manufacture every component. These limitations drive explorator fleets to take increasingly desperate risks in their search for lost knowledge. Expeditions venture into regions of space where warp storms make navigation hazardous, hoping to find human colonies that survived the age of strife in isolation and might possess STC systems or manufacturing knowledge lost elsewhere. Tech priests explore space hulks, those massive conglomerations of wrecked ships fused together by warp exposure, searching for vessels that might contain intact data archives or functioning technology worth recovering. The dangers prove extreme, as space hulks frequently harbor orc infestations, gene-stealer cults, or worse threats, but the potential rewards justify the risks in Mechanicum calculations. A single intact STC fragment recovered from a space hulk could provide knowledge that benefits the Imperium for millennia, making the deaths of entire explorator expeditions acceptable losses in pursuit of that goal. The Styges 8 Forge world exemplifies the more radical approach to the quest for knowledge, their tech priests openly pursuing research into Xenos technology despite official Mechanicum prohibitions. Located on the fringes of Imperial space, near regions heavily contested with Eldar craftworlds, Styges 8 has developed expertise in studying and occasionally incorporating alien technological principles into their own designs. Their Skitarii legions employ weapons that blend human and Xenos design elements, creating hybrid systems that Orthodox tech priests consider borderline heretical, but that prove devastatingly effective in combat. The Forge world's Magi argue that understanding Xenos technology better equips humanity to defend against it, that ignorance serves no purpose when facing enemies whose weapons incorporate principles human science has not discovered. Their critics counter that this reasoning provides convenient justification for tech heresy, that Styges 8 has strayed from the true path of the machine god by polluting pure human knowledge with alien contamination. The recovery of even minor SDC fragments triggers celebrations across entire Forge worlds, as each discovery represents a victory in the eternal quest for knowledge. When an explorator fleet returns with a functioning SDC database, regardless of how limited its contents, the Fabricator General typically declares a feast day where normal manufacturing schedules are suspended, and tech priests gather to witness the fragment's contents being analyzed and incorporated into Mechanicum archives. The recovered data undergoes exhaustive verification to ensure its authenticity and completeness, with teams of Lex mechanics spending years comparing it against existing knowledge and testing whether the specifications it contains actually produce functional results. This verification process proves essential, as corrupted SDC fragments sometimes contain specifications that appear complete but actually describe devices that cannot function, their data degraded in ways that are not immediately apparent. The Great Rift's eruption tore reality itself across the galaxy, splitting the Imperium in half and plunging countless worlds into darkness. For the Adeptus Mechanicus, this catastrophe struck at the heart of their operations in ways that went beyond mere physical disruption. Forge worlds throughout the Imperium Nihilus found themselves cut off from Mars, their communication with the Fabricator General severed by warp storms that made reliable astropathic contact impossible. The carefully maintained hierarchy that had governed Mechanicum operations for 10,000 years fractured overnight. Fabricator locums who had previously deferred to Mars on matters of doctrine and policy now faced the reality that they might never receive guidance from the Red Planet again. Some embraced this newfound autonomy, making decisions that would have required approval from Mars under normal circumstances. Others struggled with the theological implications of operating without oversight from the seat of Mechanicum authority, their faith tested by circumstances that seemed to suggest the machine god had abandoned them. The return of Robute Guilliman from his millennia-long stasis complicated an already chaotic situation. The Primarch of the Ultramarines, now serving as Lord Commander of the Imperium, possessed authority that technically superseded even the Fabricator Generals within the Imperium's political structure. Yet his relationship with the Adeptus Mechanicus proved fraught with tensions that reflected fundamental differences in how he and the tech priests viewed technology and its role in human civilization. Guilliman approached technology pragmatically, viewing it as a tool to be understood and utilized rather than an object of religious veneration. His experiences during the Great Crusade had exposed him to the full range of human technological capability, and he remembered a time when tech priests pursued genuine understanding rather than treating every piece of equipment as a sacred relic requiring ritual appeasement. The Primarch's status as the son of the Emperor created theological complications that the Mechanicum struggled to address. If the Emperor was the Omnissiah, the physical manifestation of the machine god's will, then his sons occupied positions within the divine hierarchy that demanded recognition. Yet Guilliman himself rejected divinity, viewing his father's deification by the ecclesiarchy with barely concealed disgust. He made no claims to sacred status and actively discouraged any attempts to incorporate him into Mechanicum religious observances. This created awkward situations where tech priests who genuinely believed in the Emperor's divinity had to reconcile their faith with the Primarch's insistence that he was merely an exceptionally advanced human rather than anything approaching a demigod. Some resolved this by treating Guilliman's protests as a form of divine humility, interpreting his rejection of worship as evidence of his worthiness for veneration. Others accepted his self-assessment, while maintaining that his genetic heritage from the Omnissiah granted him authority over Mechanicum operations, regardless of his personal beliefs. Guilliman's reforms to imperial military and administrative structures frequently brought him into conflict with Mechanicum traditions. He demanded increased production of specific equipment types to support his Indomitus crusade, requisitioning Forge World output in ways that disrupted carefully balanced manufacturing schedules maintained for centuries. His insistence on standardization across imperial forces clashed with the Mechanicum's tendency to allow individual forge worlds to develop specialized variants of standard templates. A forge world might produce lasguns that incorporated minor modifications reflecting local expertise or available materials, creating weapons that functioned identically to standard patterns but differed in specific details. Guilliman viewed this variation as inefficiency that complicated logistics and maintenance. The tech priests saw it as legitimate expression of their forge world's unique relationship with the machine god, each variation representing insights gained through millennia of manufacturing experience. The Primarch's willingness to embrace innovation when tactical necessity demanded it horrified conservative elements within the Mechanicum. He authorized field modifications to equipment when existing designs proved inadequate for specific combat situations, treating SDC patterns as starting points rather than inviolable templates. His forces developed new tactical doctrines that required equipment modifications. The Mechanicum considered borderline heretical weapons configurations that deviated from recovered specifications in ways that served immediate military needs, but violated theological principles about the sanctity of ancient designs. Guilliman's response to Mechanicum objections demonstrated his fundamental pragmatism. If a modification improved combat effectiveness and did not compromise reliability, then implementing it served the Emperor's goals regardless of whether it aligned with tech priest religious sensibilities. Belisarius Cawl represented everything that traditional Mechanicum doctrine opposed, yet his achievements proved so significant that even his harshest critics could not completely dismiss him. The Archmagos Dominus had spent 10,000 years working on a project that violated numerous Mechanicum prohibitions, creating improved space marines through genetic manipulation that went far beyond the parameters the Emperor had originally established. The Primaris space marines that emerged from Cawl's laboratories stood taller than their standard counterparts, their enhanced physiology incorporating additional organs and improved versions of existing gene seed implants. Their weapons and armor utilized technologies that Cawl had either recovered from obscure archives or developed through research that skirted the boundaries of acceptable innovation. The theological implications of Cawl's work sparked fierce debates throughout the Mechanicum. Conservative factions accused him of tech heresy, arguing that modifying the Emperor's original Space Marine design constituted blasphemy against the Omnissiah's perfect creation. They pointed out that Cawl had not simply recovered lost SDC data, but had actively innovated, developing new technologies and improving upon existing designs in ways that went far beyond acceptable optimization. His willingness to experiment, to test hypotheses and discard approaches that failed, represented the kind of genuine scientific inquiry that the Mechanicum had suppressed for millennia. That such methods had produced functional results made them more dangerous rather than less, as success might encourage other tech priests to abandon proper reverence for ancient knowledge in favor of pursuing their own research programs. Cawl's defenders, and he had acquired surprisingly many despite his controversial methods, argued that his work represented the logical culmination of the quest for knowledge. He had not invented the Primaris Marines from nothing, but rather had studied the Emperor's original work extensively, analyzing the genetic templates and biological principles that made Space Marines possible. His improvements built upon this foundation, applying understanding gained through millennia of study to enhance designs that the Emperor himself had created under time pressure during the Unification Wars. The Primaris project demonstrated that comprehending ancient technology well enough to improve, it did not constitute heresy, but rather represented the highest achievement of the quest for knowledge. If tech priests truly sought to recover the understanding that humanity's ancestors possessed, then achieving sufficient comprehension to advance beyond recovered templates should be celebrated rather than condemned. The Archmagos' personality did nothing to endear him to his critics. Cawl displayed arrogance that bordered on contempt for tech priests he considered intellectually inferior, which included most of the Mechanicum hierarchy. He openly mocked conservative positions on technological development, dismissing concerns about innovation as superstitious fear masquerading as theological principle. His public statements suggested he viewed the Cult Mechanicus's religious framework as useful mythology that helped maintain social cohesion among less intellectually capable tech priests, but that enlightened members of the priesthood should recognize as metaphorical rather than literal truth. This attitude infuriated even moderate tech priests who might otherwise have been willing to acknowledge his achievements, as it seemed to dismiss the sincere faith that motivated their service to the machine god. The Call Inferior represented perhaps the Archmagos' most controversial creation, a device that raised fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and the Mechanicum's absolute prohibition against artificial intelligence. Call had created this mechanism as a repository for his knowledge and personality, a sophisticated cogitator system that could think and respond in ways that mimicked his own thought patterns. The Inferior accompanied Gilliman during the Indomitus Crusade, providing technical expertise and access to information that Call himself could not deliver personally, while attending to his responsibilities on Mars and various Forge worlds. The device demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond standard machine spirits or even the most sophisticated cogitator systems. It engaged in genuine conversation, adapted its responses based on context, and displayed what appeared to be independent reasoning rather than simply executing pre-programmed responses to specific inputs. The distinction between the Call Inferior and true artificial intelligence became the subject of intense theological debate. The Mechanicum's prohibition against abominable intelligence dated back to the Age of Strife, when humanity's AI servants had turned against their creators with catastrophic results. The wars that followed had nearly destroyed human civilization, with rogue AIs wielding weapons and commanding resources that made them effectively unstoppable by conventional military forces. The Mechanicum had codified this historical trauma into absolute religious law. Creating true artificial intelligence constituted the gravest possible tech heresy, an act that risked repeating the catastrophes that had nearly ended humanity's existence. Yet the exact parameters defining what constituted true AI versus acceptable machine intelligence remained frustratingly vague, as the Mechanicum had deliberately avoided detailed analysis of the distinction, lest such study lead tech priests toward forbidden knowledge. Call argued that the Inferior represented an advanced expert system rather than genuine AI, a sophisticated program that simulated intelligence without possessing actual consciousness. The device operated within carefully defined parameters, its responses generated through complex algorithms that analyzed input and selected appropriate outputs from vast databases of information. It could not truly think or feel, could not develop goals independent of its programming, and could not modify its own core functions in ways that would allow it to transcend its design purpose. These limitations, Call maintained, placed the Inferior firmly on the acceptable side of the line separating sophisticated machine spirits from abominable intelligence. His critics countered that these distinctions were semantic games, that any device capable of engaging in apparently intelligent conversation and adapting its behavior based on experience had crossed into forbidden territory, regardless of how its creator chose to describe its operating principles. The practical reality that imperial forces desperately needed the technological advantages Call provided forced the Mechanicum to tolerate his activities despite widespread discomfort with his methods. The Primaris Marines proved their effectiveness in combat across thousands of worlds, their enhanced capabilities allowing them to prevail in situations where standard Space Marines would have struggled. The weapons and equipment Call developed for these new warriors incorporated improvements that conventional Mechanicum research had not achieved in 10,000 years. Plasma weapons that ran cooler and more reliably, bolt weapons with improved armor penetration, and power armor that provided better protection while maintaining mobility all emerged from Call's workshops. Suppressing his research would deny the Imperium tools it needed to survive in an era when threats multiplied faster than Imperial forces could respond to them. The Great Rift's impact on Mechanicum operations extended beyond simple communication disruptions. Forge worlds in the Imperium Nihilus faced threats that had previously been contained or manageable. Chaos incursions increased in frequency and severity as the warp's influence strengthened throughout the darkened regions of the galaxy. Demon engines that the Dark Mechanicum had been developing since the heresy now deployed in greater numbers, their corrupted machine spirits empowered by the warp energies flooding through the rift. Tech priests who had maintained their faith through millennia of service found themselves confronting evidence that seemed to contradict everything they believed about the machine god's supremacy. Demons possessed machinery despite proper consecration and maintenance, their warp stuff overwhelming machine spirits that should have been protected by correct ritual observance. Scrap code infections spread through systems that had been purified according to established procedures, suggesting that traditional countermeasures no longer provided adequate protection against threats empowered by the rift's energies. Necron activity throughout the galaxy challenged Mechanicum assumptions about humanity's technological supremacy in more fundamental ways. These ancient Xenos were awakening from their millions of years of hibernation, their tomb worlds activating and deploying forces equipped with technology that made even Dark Age human achievements seem primitive by comparison. Weapons that stripped targets from existence atom by atom, armor that phased between dimensions to avoid damage entirely, and faster-than-light travel that did not rely on the warp all demonstrated capabilities that human science could not replicate or even fully explain. Tech priests who encountered Necron technology firsthand struggled to reconcile what they observed with their theological understanding of the machine god's nature. If the Omnissiah represented the supreme manifestation of technological mastery, how could Xenos possess capabilities that exceeded anything humanity had achieved even at its height? Some tech priests responded to these challenges by doubling down on traditional beliefs, arguing that apparent Necron superiority reflected humanity's fall from grace rather than any fundamental limitation. The ancestors of the Dark Age of technology had commanded powers equal to or exceeding anything the Necrons possessed, these conservatives maintained, and recovering that lost knowledge remained possible through faithful prosecution of the quest. Others began questioning whether the Mechanicum's theological framework accurately described reality, whether the machine god was truly the supreme force governing all technology or merely humanity's limited understanding of principles that transcended species boundaries. These doubts remained largely unspoken, as expressing them openly would invite accusations of heresy, but they spread through informal networks of tech priests who shared concerns about whether traditional doctrine could adequately address the challenges facing the Imperium in the 42nd millennium. The question of whether the Omnissiahs could unite the fragmented Mechanicum became increasingly urgent as the Imperium struggled to coordinate responses to threats emerging from the Great Rift. Forge worlds in the Imperium Nihilus made decisions based on local conditions, and their fabricator Locum's interpretations of Mechanicum doctrine, creating inconsistencies that complicated efforts to maintain unified technological standards across Imperial forces. Some Forge worlds embraced Call's innovations, incorporating his improved designs into their manufacturing processes and supporting his research programs. Others rejected anything associated with the controversial Archmagos, viewing his work as dangerous precedent that threatened to undermine the theological foundations of the Cult Mechanicus. These divisions manifested in practical ways that affected Imperial military operations, as forces equipped by different Forge worlds sometimes received incompatible equipment or weapons that required different maintenance procedures despite nominally serving identical functions. Guilliman's attempts to impose greater standardization and coordination met resistance from tech priests who viewed such efforts as infringement on the autonomy that the Treaty of Mars had guaranteed. The Primarch possessed authority to requisition Mechanicum support for military operations, but the exact boundaries of this authority remained subject to interpretation. Could he dictate which specific technologies Forge worlds should prioritize producing? Could he override fabricator locums who refused to implement designs they considered theologically questionable? The answers to these questions had significant implications for the relationship between the Imperium and the Mechanicum, potentially requiring renegotiation of agreements that had governed their interaction for 10,000 years. Neither side wanted open conflict, as both recognized that humanity's survival depended on continued cooperation, but tensions escalated as the Indomitus Crusades demands strained Mechanicum resources and patience. The Adeptus Mechanicus in the era, Indomitus faced challenges that tested their faith in ways that 10,000 years of relative stability had not prepared them for. The certainties that had sustained the Cult Mechanicus since the Treaty of Mars no longer seemed adequate to address the realities of a galaxy torn by the Great Rift. Traditional answers to theological questions about innovation, the nature of machine spirits, and the proper relationship between humanity and technology all required re-examination in light of new threats and capabilities that existing doctrines struggled to accommodate. Yet the Mechanicum's fundamental conservatism, its deep-seated conviction that ancient wisdom surpassed modern understanding, made rapid adaptation difficult even when circumstances demanded it. The debate over Call's work and the Primaris Marines encapsulated these tensions. His achievements demonstrated that genuine innovation remained possible, that understanding ancient technology well enough to improve upon it did not inevitably lead to catastrophe. Yet accepting this conclusion required acknowledging that the quest for knowledge might involve creating new understanding, rather than simply recovering what ancestors had known. This shift in perspective threatened to undermine theological positions that had defined Mechanicum identity since the cult's founding on Mars during the Age of Strife. If tech priests could legitimately innovate, if improving upon recovered templates represented acceptable practice rather than tech heresy, then the entire framework of religious prohibitions that governed Mechanicum research required revision. The implications extended far beyond Call's specific projects to encompass fundamental questions about the Mechanicum's purpose and relationship with technology. As the 42nd millennium progressed, the Adeptus Mechanicus found itself at a crossroads between tradition and necessity. The Omnissiah's will, whether embodied in the Emperor, manifested through the machine god, or represented by something else entirely, would need to guide the priesthood through challenges that their ancestors had never imagined. The fragmented nature of Mechanicum authority following the Great Rift meant that different Forge worlds would likely pursue different answers to these questions, their solutions reflecting local conditions and the theological positions of their leadership. Whether this diversity would strengthen the Mechanicum by allowing experimentation with multiple approaches or weaken it through loss of unified purpose remained to be seen. What seemed certain was that the Adeptus Mechanicus could not simply maintain course, that the era Indomitus demanded adaptation from an institution whose entire identity centered on preserving the past rather than creating the future. The quest for knowledge continued, but its destination had become less clear than at any point since the Emperor first walked on Mars and accepted the title of Omnissiah from tech priests who believed they had found their prophesied savior.